Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 100 Days Conference assessing the first 100 days of the Trump administration, brought to you by the New Republic and the Contrarian. I'm Norm Eisen. I'm the publisher of the Contrarian.
I'm Jen Rubin, the editor-in-chief of the Contrarian.
I'm Michael Tomasky. I'm the editor of the New Republic.
I'm so honored to be here on behalf of the Contrarian and to do this jointly with the New Republic, one of our nation's most venerable publications, joining with one of our nation's newest publications to assess 100 days of Donald Trump's dictatorship. He said he would be a dictator on day one, and he never stopped, but also 100 days of pushback by the democracy movement that you'll hear about across all of the areas of contestation today. The ferocious pushback has led to the failure of Donald Trump's autocratic and authoritarian aspiration for his first 100 days. When Jen and I started the Contrarian shortly before Trump took office, we never could have imagined the momentum shift that we would see or the success that we've enjoyed. And we're so grateful to each and every one of you Contrarians who are joining us for today's panels, which we're hosting together with the New Republic. We knew that there was a need to be truthful, not neutral. We knew when Jen left the Post, I left CNN, that the moment called for a different kind of journalism. What we couldn't have expected really came as a shock to us was the outpouring of support and the unique model, the partnership that we formed with our Contrarians, where we not only report on the democracy pushback, but all paid subscribers to the Contrarians are a part of that. Since we're owned by no one, all of the proceeds from the Contrarian go to support the litigation assault. And what a pushback that has been. We'll hear about that today on our rule of law panel, but we'll also cover the other main areas where the democracy movement has been so powerful, including people power. That is the ultimate backstop, guardrail, and safety net for democracy. And that's why we wanted to come and talk to all of you today about what has happened in the first 100 days, why Donald Trump has failed in his dictatorial aspirations, but also what lies ahead and how democracy can ultimately triumph.
Well, now, Michael, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Norm. Thank you, Jen. I want to thank both of my friends here for agreeing to do this with us. As Norm said, an older publication, a legacy publication, as we're often called, dating back to 1914, combined with a publication that dates back to March?
Yes.
Right.
Actually, January.
January, okay, yeah. Fair enough.
Don't shortchange us.
And we cooked this up about 50 days ago, I think, at which point we were all already, I think, shocked and staggered at what we were seeing coming out of this new administration. They came out of the gate with a force and a breadth of activity that I think none of us quite anticipated. In the subsequent 50 days, it's gotten even more intense. And some of the things they've done have been quite shocking to us, to you watching, I'm sure, and to many, many millions of Americans who are saying to pollsters and to others who are paying attention, this can't stand. We need some pushback, and we have pushback. And that's one of the heartening developments of these 100 days, is after a little bit of a slow start, we're seeing, and Norm is deeply involved with this, and we'll get into this today in this discussion, we're seeing tremendous work on the parts of citizens, on the parts of lawyers, on the parts of government employees, on the parts of union officials, on the parts of so many leaders who are saying, this is not the America that we live in. That's what we say. That's what the Contrarian says every day in its journalism. That's what the New Republic says every day in its journalism. That's what we're here to say today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I want to extend another thank you to Michael, who came up with this idea. And like Judy Garland and Mickey Roney, we said, oh, we could put on a show, and we hope you'll enjoy it. I want to echo something that Norm said, and that is when we started the publication, The Outlet, we did not realize the thirst for a sense of community. And remember, in a dictatorship, they seek to divide, to isolate, to depress. And the antidote for that is community, is good humor, is solidarity. And we've seen it not only with our contrarian community, but with the various groups and the various aspects of civil society you are going to hear from. Unions have been at the forefront, nonprofits, and of course, the lawyers. And when we do this, when we maintain our solidarity, when we keep our eye on the ball, which is preserving democracy, the success is remarkable. We don't want to sugarcoat, and we will never sugarcoat the damage that Donald Trump is doing, but we also don't want to undersell the opposition. We have seen hundreds of thousands of Americans take to the streets, actually more people than did in 2017. You might not know it from watching cable news, but that's a fact. We've also seen a plethora of lawsuits, Norm involved in many, if not most of them. And we've seen at every juncture stymied the administration. Judges standing up for the rule of law, saying, no, there's a first article of the Constitution, there's a second article, and we are the third article. And we are not going to permit the unilateral takeover of the government. So we have made progress. We'll continue to make progress. And we invite you to stay with us, to join the conversation, to listen to some of the finest experts who we are incredibly grateful to have with us today. And it is very appropriate that we should begin with our keynote speech from Liz Shuler, who is the president of the AFL-CIO, and labor is indispensable, both now and it will be in the future as we fight the totalitarian threat.
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Liz Shuler, president of the AFL-CIO. I am so honored to be here with you today, and thanks everyone for tuning in, because this is the 100-day mark, and we are so honored as the labor movement to be a part of today. This is a 100 Days conference, and we want to thank our three hosts, of course, for bringing us together. And not just those here in the room, but of course, everyone out there watching online. I have to thank Norm Eisen, who, incredible colleague and friend, but who has built a phenomenal coalition of some of the best lawyers in the country to protect the rule of law. And I just want to personally thank you, Norm, for everything you have done also to protect the civil service. So I appreciate you. Michael Tomasky, Jennifer Rubin, of course, thank you for speaking truth to power at the New Republic and the Contrarian, for sounding the alarms on the attacks on our democracy. And that's really where I want to start today, is democracy. Democracy means rule by the people. And I'm here today representing people, the labor movement, which believes in the idea that democracy is at our very core. 15 million working people in our federation, 63 unions. Our members know and tell themselves daily, my voice matters. That, you know, me, my brothers, my sisters and siblings, we are the ones who can shape our unions and shape the future of our country. And it's because of that belief in democracy that we stand up every single day against the concentration of wealth and power that exists. So 100 days ago, when we heard Elon Musk was going to get his own Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, right? He was going to have an outsized voice in how our government worked. We decided to do something about it. So we created our own department. We created the Department of People Who Work for a Living. That's right, the Department of People Who Work for a Living. Because we see what is happening on the front lines of how these government agencies operate. We are the folks who are doing the work behind the scenes. We are the folks who really need to understand what this DOGE is even doing and how it impacts people and why it matters. So the Department of People Who Work for a Living has become that platform. And we started hosting town halls and hearings in communities all over the country, in places like outside Macon, Georgia, Asheville, North Carolina, places our politicians don't often go to. And these aren't red or blue strongholds. We set them up with a very simple idea, that if you have a story, if you've been affected by what has gone on, join us. We want to hear from you. So over the last 2 weeks, thousands of Americans showed up. Not just Democrats, not just activists, people from every walk of life who said, I have never come out to one of these before. But what has been going on has changed my life and has changed my community, and I want to speak out. I want to be with other people who are feeling the same. Some working people showed up who had been fired from the only job they'd had in 20 years. And they were fired over email, by the way. We had veterans show up who had served in active duty, who suddenly couldn't get the care that they needed. But I'll tell you the other thing I saw. I saw people standing up, fighting back, not just for themselves, but for their neighbors. A retired letter carrier in Charlotte, North Carolina, Jacqueline Sandel, who said, they're jeopardizing the jobs and services that my friends count on, and I will not and I cannot sit back and watch that unfold. We heard from Simplice Coelho, a local leader at the Cargill meatpacking plant in Davenport, Iowa, and he said, those same immigrants that they're threatening, we put food on America's tables. And so I'm fighting not just for our workers, but for every family in this country. Lori Hendricks, a nurse at Mission Hospital in Asheville, who said, my patients count on Medicaid. I will fight with everything I have to protect it and vote those out who threaten it. Unions give voices like these a platform, and we amplify them wherever we go, especially in this town, in Washington, D.C. And these stories and voices coming together is how we build power. And I think Congress and the White House need to know that what we have seen the past 100 days out of this administration, the policies, the agenda, the way they're doing it, it ain't working. It's crossing a line. They've attacked independent thought in the media and higher education, in our judicial system, especially in our unions. And the reason for stripping 1 million federal workers of their collective bargaining rights, the reason? It's because they didn't like that our unions were fighting back. They've attacked our most vulnerable, our immigrant workers like Kumar Abrego Garcia, and trans and queer Americans with the goal of dividing us. They've attacked the coalitions that are most equipped to fight back. And they've started with organized labor because authoritarians always start with organized labor. They came immediately for our federal workforce, cutting funding that Congress appropriated, firing workers with no due process, lying about their performance, trying to get other workers to quit. And when our unions fought back, the grievances, the lawsuits, what we saw in response was the single biggest act of union busting in our history. I'm going to say that again. the dismantling of collective bargaining rights for our federal workforce, the largest attack on the labor movement in our history. 1 million federal workers illegally stripped of their collective bargaining rights, moving to cancel their union contracts with the stroke of a pen. And those who haven't filed grievances yet, they're saying, oh, we'll give you your rights and your contracts back if you keep your mouth shut and fall in line. Well, if you know anything about the labor movement, we don't fall in line for autocrats. We know an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And today it's our federal workers. Tomorrow it's the private sector and the nonprofits. And the day after that, it's the basic rights and dignity of every working person in this country. And the question for us right now is, and it's the same question that's really been the same for every coalition in history that has stood up in a crisis of democracy. And that question is, how do we build the mass movement? How do we create power when all of the traditional levers of power are out of our control? Well, I'm here representing 15 million working people, again, across 63 unions in every sector of the economy. And what I can tell you from talking to those workers, protesting with those workers, striking with those workers, there is a common agenda that unites the majority of this country. It's our job, all of us here, to paint that picture that there's a common vision that is possible. And asking every person a simple question. Are you better off now than you were 100 days ago? Do you feel safer knowing that people who inspect our food and keep our water safe and clean and make sure our planes are flying safely in the sky, does it make you feel safer to know that those workers who ensure that have been fired from their jobs? Is life for you and your family easier now that the people who run our child care centers and work at our Social Security offices are not there anymore? Does it make sense to you that your dad, your mom, your loved one might get thrown off Medicare so that billionaires get another tax cut they don't need? The fact that Trump is underwater right now on every issue, inflation, the economy, taxation, even immigration, does not happen by accident, folks. It happens because we have organized and we have turned up the heat. We can rewrite this country's history. We have the organizing strength to do it. Look at what we've done. Look at what we've done. At the turn of the 20th century, we had the 40-hour work week was never even heard of, right? Until the workers started organizing in Chicago and across the country and organized for something better. Child labor was a permanent fixture of our economy until Mother Jones and the Newsboys and the Bread and Roses strike in Massachusetts rallied the country for reform. Discrimination in the workplace was the norm until the labor movement and civil rights movements came together and fought for the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Right now, we have that kind of energy. We have it at the grassroots level. We have tens of thousands showing up to rallies and protests and town halls who are ready to do something. We have entire communities coming out to protect their immigrant neighbors. We have brave lawyers taking the fight to this administration, winning in court so that thousands of Americans can return to their jobs. We have people organizing together and forming unions in places we have never seen, like the Deep South, saying, if my government isn't going to fight for me and raise my minimum wage to a livable wage, then I'm going to stand with my coworkers and I'm going to do it myself. We can do this together. We can connect ourselves to an agenda that unifies the people of this country and that they're hungry for. We can all come together to defend the rights of our federal workers, knowing that you could be next in line. We can come together and demand more out of our politicians when our rights and freedoms are under attack. And we don't have to choose sides when it comes to the basic dignity and humanity of all people, including immigrants, trans and queer folk, and those under attack from this administration. So Jen, I'm going to close with a quote, something you said last week. You wrote, "Democracy does not defend itself, nor can we expect politicians to save us from autocrats. The decision to capitulate or resist rests with each of us. The sum of all of those decisions will determine if we succeed or fail." Thank you, Jen. Couldn't agree more. None of us on our own as individuals or within our organizations can defeat autocracy or oligarchy. But it's up to all of us to work together, protest together, because courage begets more courage. And more people get involved. So thank you so much. Let's use this conference, this 100-day milestone, as the moment to come together, to strategize, to organize, and really start creating the kind of society that we all want to live in. Thank you so much.
Five, four, three, two, one. I'm Jen.
I'm Norm.
Everything I read is Norm Eisen.
We're in an unprecedented moment. No, Donald Trump, you can't rewrite the Constitution. No, Donald Trump, you can't freeze all spending.
And no one elected Elon Musk.
There is something really grotesque about Elon Musk boasting about killing off USAID as he's got $400 billion of net wealth.
It's an all-out assault on the principles of democracy.
Republicans ventured out to town halls.
Constituents were showing up and making their voices heard.
Now, they aren't doing town halls.
Kissing, knee bending, kowtowing. People.
Not a left versus whatever thing. This is people who want to fight versus people who don't.
Abraham Lincoln came from a whole lot of people demanding the truth.
And to see the ability of the American people over and over again to step up and meet the challenge.
The more you feel the pain, the more you want to go out and show it.
Hands off my Constitution! Okay, friends, we're going to cover today on a series of panels the key areas of contestation that will determine whether Donald Trump's dictatorial aspirations succeed or whether democracy endures. The first of those, and among the most important, if not the most important, is the rule of law. If an autocrat is able to seize control of courts, judges, the prosecution function, and the rule of law, the justice system, then they can use that to entrench themselves, including by crushing their opponents with the weight of the power of the state. But if the rule of law system is sufficiently strong and independent and resilient that it refuses to be captured, then it acts as a primary safeguard, as a check and balance, holding autocracy back. I'm so pleased to have two of the finest experts in the country joining me on the question of the state of rule of law in America after 100 days of Donald Trump's pushing and democracy's pushback. Immediately to my left is Mary McCord, the executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, ICAP, at Georgetown Law. Has brought a lot of important litigation, including the birthright citizenship case that is one of the cases that is up at the United States Supreme Court right now and has had a long and distinguished career at the Department of Justice, including in a series of national security roles. And immediately to Mary's left is Judge Michael Luttig, a leading voice, a conservative voice, a long and distinguished career that included a tenure on the Fourth Circuit, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, an official in Republican White Houses, and an important legal leader in the private sector, and one of our strongest conservative legal voices, and one of the first to break with those who attempted to justify Donald Trump's predations on the rule of law. Thank you both for being with us for this 100-day conference. Judge Luttig, I'm going to start with you. And I should say, by the way, that Mary and Mike are dear friends of mine. I talk to one or the other of them most days. On a good day, I get to talk to both of them. Judge Luttig, lately the thing you and I have been discussing is the assault on the judiciary represented by what happened to Judge Hannah Dugan in Wisconsin. Will you reflect on that and the larger meaning? What's going on here with the Trump administration's targeting of Judge Dugan?
Thank you, Norm, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, the New Republic, and the Contrarian, for this very important, indeed essential gathering today to reflect on the president's first 100 days in office. History already recorded that the president of the United States corrupted America's democracy between January 6th, 2021 and January 20th, 2025 by his effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election that he lost fair and square to then candidate Joe Biden, and then by his defiance that it was actually he who had attempted to steal that election from the American people, not they from him, and his glorification of January 6th, one of the darkest days in all of American history. Fast forward to January 20th, 2025, on his first day in office, the President of the United States declared war on the federal judiciary, the Constitution of the United States, and the rule of law. 100 days thence, today, the President of the United States has corrupted the rule of law in America. America cannot withstand this any longer. If this president's first 100 days in office are a harbinger of what is to come, America and the world will never forget the 45th president of the United States of America, nor will either ever forgive this president for his war against the rule of law in America, the Constitution, and the federal judiciary. The arrest, most recently, of Judge Duggan the unlawful arrest and criminal prosecution of a sitting state judge in this country is how the end begins, Norm.
Mary, the threat is clear, it's massive, it's unprecedented. But equally clear and massive and unprecedented is the pushback. And you've been a part of that from the very beginning. Perhaps the most grotesque of those unconstitutional acts that the judge is pointing to. There's many to pick from on day one. Perhaps the most grotesque was Donald Trump saying, "Never mind the Constitution. I get to choose who born here is a citizen and who is not," putting his own whim above the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship for those born on U.S. soil. Tell us about the pushback on this assault on the Constitution, law, rule of law, and the American idea that we're a government of laws, not of people.
That's actually a great place to start. And like Judge Luttig, I thank everyone for putting this together today and also for everyone watching. We're talking about rule of law, and so before answering that, let's talk about what does rule of law mean? Because I think that's one of those terms that gets used lots and lots, but I think if you ask a lot of Americans what is it, they might struggle for words. So it might mean slightly different things to slightly different people, but this is what it means to me, and it really has 4 parts. One is a system of laws by which the governed and the government agree to abide. Next is transparency in the enactment and enforcement of those laws so that there is stability and predictability. Third is a fair legal system for adjudicating rights and responsibilities. And finally, that legal system is supported by diverse, competent, independent lawyers and judges. So if we now look at what's happening, the arrest of Judge Dogan, the trampling of the Constitution with the president's birthright citizenship order, steamrolling Congress by dismantling departments and agencies that were established by law under Congress's Article II authority, cutting off funding that was appropriated by Congress under its Article II authority. I could go on and on and on. And of course, paramount also to all this is deporting without due process. In other words, without notice and an opportunity to go into court and to make your case, deporting people alleged to be members of a foreign terrorist organization without due process, deporting people alleged to be criminals without due process, deporting U.S. citizen children without due process, right? These are all things that just violate every one of those 4, principles that make up the rule of law. On birthright citizenship, on day one, my team at ICAP, we were ready. We were expecting and anticipating that the president might issue an executive order about birthright citizenship. In fact, we'd been ready for this back in 2018 when he made noises about it. We had actually drafted up and had a client back in 2018, and we put that on the shelf because it didn't happen. But on January 20th, as the night got later, finally there came the executive order purporting to deny birthright citizenship to children of any 2 parents unless one parent is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. And that included not only denying birthright citizenship to children of undocumented immigrants, but also immigrants here with the permission of our government on visas, work visas, student visas, temporary protected status with the ability to work. Things our government has granted them. And people, as you may know, on work and student visas are often here for decades. So are people under temporary protected status. They build their homes here. They already have U.S. citizen children. So we, of course, challenged this because not only, as you indicated, did this violate the plain language of the 14th Amendment, it also violates the plain language of a statute that Congress passed in the 1940s that mirrors that amendment and also that reiterated the intent of Congress that it cover those born here and subject to the jurisdiction of our laws. That's what Our ICAP representing 5 pregnant women, as well as immigrant rights organizations, membership organizations that have many, many pregnant women among them. Some of these women, like I said, are here lawfully. Some are here as asylum seekers, also lawfully with pending asylum applications. And then some are here undocumented, all challenging this. People probably know this is going to be in the Supreme Court in a couple of weeks, May the 15th, but I think the reporting has sometimes been confused on this, and the merits of whether what Donald Trump did violates the Constitution and federal statute is not actually what's in the Supreme Court on May 15th. What's in the Supreme Court is the government challenging the scope of the relief that we and other litigants obtained. We obtained a nationwide or universal injunction, meaning this executive order can't go in effect anywhere, and people being born today, in fact, pregnant mothers, many of them have had children between January 20th and now, those children are U.S. citizens. This is an argument about whether universal injunctions are lawful as a matter of what courts can order. Courts of equity goes back historically for hundreds and hundreds of years. But it's something that I will say, honestly, administrations of both parties sometimes don't like universal injunctions. But there is a time for them, and maybe there's a time when they're not the right thing. But when we're talking about birthright citizenship, I mean, there kind of is no more core status in the United States for which there should be universal application.
Judge, you know this court so well. You helped pick and prepare some of them. You yourself have been on conservative short lists for the court. I dare say it would have been a very different reaction to autocracy if you'd been there. But as I wrote in my Contrarian publisher's note, if you look at 3 recent decisions of the Roberts Court, they, echoing Roberts' extraordinary statement, a pushback on Trump that we don't decide cases by attacking judges, saying we're going to impeach them. We decide them through appeals. You had the court 9-0 say that there is a legal right, a habeas right, for people in the United States. You had 7-2 reaffirming in Abrego Garcia, a second case, that the United States must facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. One of our cases, we've done dozens of cases across the country in these 100 days. In fact, I was totting up all of the legal actions we've taken. There's about 100 if you include every single different thing we've done for the 100 days. One of those cases was the reinstatement of the wrongly fired probationary employees. The Supreme Court, while issuing a stay there, pointed out to us, hey, here's how you should go about it. We were in court the next day, and we got a new order from that judge in San Francisco. How do you assess what the court has done in these first 100 days of the Trump administration, and what do you expect going forward in terms of whether we can, what we can expect to see from the court?
Let me begin to answer your question this way, Norm. By command of the Constitution of the United States, the president, this president, every president, is to faithfully execute the laws. During his first 100 days in office, Donald Trump has done anything but faithfully execute the laws. In fact, he's done precisely the opposite of that. He has defied the Constitution and the laws of the United States. Every single signature initiative of this president, from his first day in office to this day, is palpably unconstitutional. or otherwise in flagrant violation of the laws. There's no question about that whatsoever. Now, the President of the United States knows that as well, but his cynical strategy is to tie up the federal courts in Gordian knots that stymie the federal courts, so that by the time that the courts can decide all of these issues, the damage to America will have long been done. The Supreme Court of the United States has already begun to challenge the president. At the same time, it's already clear that not even the Supreme Court of the United States can ever stop the 45th President of the United States.
Mary, you spent your career, most of it at the Department of Justice, as a national security lawyer. You rose to the most senior ranks at DOJ. You oversaw some of the most sensitive investigations and prosecutions that our nation, indeed that any nation in the world, because of the traditional American leadership role that any nation brings, a role that's now jeopardized internationally by Donald Trump. Did you ever imagine you would see this day come that Judge Luttig is talking about, with this kind of a threat within the Oval Office, within the White House, within the executive branch?
No. We went through one Trump administration. There were overreaches. There was a lot of breaking of norms, right? There were things that caused litigation. But this is a completely different Trump administration from Trump 1. There were people in government who felt comfortable staying in the Department of Justice and at other departments of agencies and continuing to do the good work of the government. Sometimes they might have policy disputes with President Trump in that first administration. Some of those policy disputes, in my case, it was too much and I left, but for other people, it was something if they felt that they could in good faith defend, they would defend. We are so past that now. We are just seeing trampling, as I said before, trampling of rule of law. Executive orders and executive actions that clearly violate the Constitution, whether it is against the actual plain text of constitutional provisions, or whether it's a violation of separation of powers by encroaching on Congress's authority, whether it's violating court orders, encroaching on the judiciary's authority. These are three co-equal branches. We're seeing things, lawyers going into court from the Department of Justice who cannot answer the judge's questions. And they can't answer them because their client, the United States, is, the government officials in a position to provide those answers to questions are not giving them the answers. They are retaliating against lawyers who are candid with the court. The lawyer originally representing the government in the case of Kumar Garcia candidly and truthfully represented to the court that the government had made a mistake in deporting him in violation of the court order, and he was promptly put on administrative leave for not zealously advocating on behalf of the government. So we are in a completely different world. And to your point about the world is watching. We're not a leader anymore. In 100 days, we've gone from being respected, that our government obeys and abides by rule of law, that there is respect for the different branches so that you don't have defiance of judicial orders, you don't have defiance of congressional statutes. We were looked at as a beacon for that. And now it's just being eroded. And that respect we've had around the world, I think has been severely hampered. I will also just say by, essentially decimating the U.S. USAID and other foreign assistance, that those are our goodwill ambassadors all around the world because of their presence, providing health care, providing food, providing other services in places where other governments weren't providing it. We had the goodwill when we have to have a military operation there, when our soldiers come there, when other people from America come there. We had that goodwill. And, our adversaries, harkening to my time, national security, this is a gift to them. As we withdraw, those gaps aren't going to get left. They're going to get filled by our adversaries, and then they become the world leaders and not the United States. So the damage is so much greater than what you might think when you read about any individual action that this executive is taking.
Mike, what advice do you have, having been a government lawyer, distinguished one, starting out? When I go to court, I'll be back in court tomorrow on our Democracy Defenders case, defending 6,000 FBI agents from doxing and targeting an attack by the DOJ, and we got an order protecting them. We'll be in court on the preliminary injunction argument. It's so uncomfortable for these government lawyers who have stayed in the government and who are attempting to meet the highest traditions of our representation. And I see them struggling and saying, I don't have that information, I can't answer that question. You've seen from both sides of the bench, right, what it is like. What advice do you have for these government lawyers in the Department of Justice, in the White House, in the White House counsel's office, elsewhere in the government, on whether they should stay or go, how they carry forward their duties as an ex-judge? What would you counsel them?
I have a very clear answer for them, Norm. Their obligation is not to Donald Trump. Their obligation is to the Constitution of the United States. Many of those employees actually take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not the President of the United States. Answering the question for myself, the first time the President of the United States or any one of his representatives, such as the Attorney General of the United States, asked me to do one single thing that I knew for a fact was in violation of the Constitution and laws of the United States, I would resign immediately and I'd walk out the doors of the Department of Justice and give a press conference.
We've talked about the bookends of this 100 days, and it has been around the immigration issue, the birthright citizenship, and now these abductions, unlawful abductions, including U.S. citizens who have been this week starting to be deported. But there have been other moments, and I want us to, as we review this first 100 days in the rule of law, before we move to some of the other critical areas of contestation on the rest of our panels, I'm going to ask each of you to reflect on some of those moments, including that you've written and testified and litigated about. Another very signal moment, Mary, I'll come to you as a former prosecutor. Another very signal moment for me, and it goes to what Judge Luttig just said about walking out, was the Eric Adams prosecution and the quid pro quo that the Department of Justice political leadership at the time, Emil Bove was the most senior political official there, the developments in the Eric Adams case. And you had Danielle Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney, a Thomas clerk, I believe. She walked out. She walked out. No, she was a Scalia clerk. Scalia clerk, isn't that right? At any rate, she was a clerk for a conservative, I believe, a Scalia clerk. She walked out, and many other people left the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York, our most storied U.S. Attorney's Office. What do you make of that moment in the 100-day struggle and the pushback from within? We talked about the pushback from outside.
Yep. It was not only the right thing for her to do because she felt like her ethics would be compromised if she were to stay, but we're seeing this throughout the department. We know about half of the Solicitor General's office that represents the government before the Supreme Court has left. Just yesterday, the reporting is that hundreds of attorneys and staff from the Civil Rights Division have left because their mandate has been completely changed to really involve things that are absolutely contrary to everything that the Civil Rights Division has prioritized throughout. It's always been something where priorities change, administration to administration, but some things have been solid. And I know Vanita Gupta, who used to lead that division, will be speaking later today, can talk about how much the priorities have changed there. We've seen people leaving across the department and throughout the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I would say something about their courage. Their courage is they know that their commitment, as Judge Luttig said, is to the rule of law, to the Constitution, and to the statutes, not to Donald Trump. And I wish the law firms who have caved to Donald Trump would have that courage, because they are the Eric Adamses of the legal profession. They have a choke chain around their neck, those that entered into these agreements, because Donald Trump thinks that they are now at his beck and call to do whatever type of legal services he wants from them, which would violate all kinds of other laws, just to name it. But they also, they have no way of knowing when he's going to say, you've done enough, and when he's going to say, I'm now seeking another pound of flesh from you. Those law firms that stood up, every single one of them that challenged it got a temporary restraining order in record time in the legal system. Sometimes the judge held the hearing and issued the order within hours of filing. They are the heroes here, and they stand as a model for the rest of the legal community.
Judge, you were so outspoken when this started with the Perkins-Coie executive order, and I wanted to ask you about that and your comments at the time, which I think stiffened the spine of the legal profession. And it's important to reflect both on the assault on the rule of law, those who are enablers and collaborators. I never would have imagined some of these law firms and the people who run them. I know them well, never would have imagined it. But I'm also so heartened. Would you share your view of the attack on the law firms and the First Amendment as a safeguard that has worked in the pushback?
Of course I will. Well, let me first make a larger observation that most Americans know, and that is that from the Founding Fathers to our first president, George Washington, to our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, and all the way through contemporary presidents, it has been widely known, understood, and appreciated that if there were ever to be a threat to the United States of America, it would not come from a foreign land. It would come from within. And that is the threat today. This is the threat that our founding fathers and the framers of our Constitution feared more than anything else in the world.
And I'll just end by saying the threat is ominous. I feel so honored that in the coalition that has met the threat, and for all of the damage that he's done, has checked and balanced Donald Trump in these first 100 days, has prevented him from succeeding, has made his first 100 days a failure at the autocratic capture of Washington. I feel so fortunate that that coalition includes colleagues like my friends Mary McCord and Michael Luttig. Thank you for your outspoken leadership today over these past years for your action. And thanks, friends, for being with us to address this first of the pillars of democracy, the rule of law. And we're going to move through the remaining areas of contestation with our wonderful panels ahead. Thanks very much. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. You roll through like a true professional. Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Families, their communities, and the broader economy. I'd really like to hear your questions and share my answers to them with you. By the way, there are no bad questions. Now, there may be some bad answers, and there's definitely some bad policies. So let's get together and make this happen. I'll be doing a live Contrarian Q&A next Tuesday on Substack. Then join me at 12 noon Eastern Time for Let's Do Lunch, real-time econ Q&A with me, Jared Bernstein. Send in your question in text or video to submit@contrariannews.org.
Hi, I'm Neera Tandon. I'm president of the Center for American Progress. I am so excited to be here to talk about the 100 days into this administration and the interconnection between democracy and our economy.
And I'm Jared Bernstein. I'm happy to be here as well with Neera. Neera and I worked together in various administrations, actually, but most recently the Biden administration. And I'm working with Neera at the Center for American Progress as well. So this is an alliance that's been ongoing and looking for great things going forward.
Great. So maybe I'll just start, Jared, by asking you, where is our economy today? We've had 100 days of this administration. So really just compare where we are in this moment of time to where we were, again, 100 days ago at the end of the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, Neera, there's a lot to unpack under what I'm about to say, but a great rubric for starting that conversation is that President Trump inherited a strong economy, and he has squandered that inheritance. I and most other economists, and I'm talking about pretty much anyone who's not paid to think otherwise, recognize that this administration has inflicted a level of self-inflicted wounds or own goal kicks that's taken a strong economy to a weak one in about 100 days or less. And as you well know, it's really pretty hard in empirical economics to connect things that are happening in the economy to a single set of actions or even a single guy. In this case, it's alarmingly straightforward. It's the trade war, it's the chaos, it's the policy uncertainty, it's the threatening the independence of the Federal Reserve, it's the Doge cuts, it's a terribly recklessly budget process, and We can get into that. So all of that, but the wrinkle is, I could stop there, but the wrinkle is, and it's a big wrinkle, is that you really haven't seen it yet in the hard data. GDP, jobs, income, those data lag. Now, we're speaking on a Tuesday. Tomorrow, we're going to get first quarter GDP growth. That's expected to come in quite flat. And you asked about the economy they inherited. GDP was growing at 2.4% in the fourth quarter of last year, and that had been a steady, ongoing pace of above-trend economic growth. So it's a solid GDP growth rate, but we're looking for that to really slow pretty quickly.
Great. So I'll just follow up maybe a little bit on just the impacts of this. I think one of the things that's so surprising, and this I think will connect to democracy in a minute, is Donald Trump was elected to focus on the concerns of working class people, inflation, costs of living. Talk a little bit about the impact of his economic policies on those very people. People who are struggling to get by, who are struggling to make ends meet, working class people across the country who, I think we would both say were a bit battered by inflation, particularly a few years ago. But in a weird way, he was elected to try to solve that problem. And how are his economic policies doing on that score?
Badly, and so I really think there's a very important list or agenda which comes under, again, the rubric of I didn't vote for that. And I'm thinking about it expressly in the way you're describing, Nero, which is people voted for Trump, for example, to lower prices and to lower interest rates, which, of course, he explicitly said he would do. Tariffs increase prices. Let's be very clear about that. There's been a lot of misinformation, although I will say, and I think the media has done a uniquely good job on this, it is now, I think, quite well understood that tariffs do, in fact, get passed forward. Tariffs are a tax on imports. They do get passed forward to consumers in higher prices. So we're going to see prices go up on imported goods. We're going to see the prices go up on producing here because more than half of what we import are inputs into our own manufacturing. Interest rates are still seeing some pressure because of some dynamics we've been discussing. I think the budget is in there as well. So I think that there is a real betrayal of people who voted for Trump to really help them. I think there's lots of ways in which he's hurting them. And I've just been talking about the economics. We should get into some of the policies, canceling the minimum wage for federal workers, things like that. Let me turn the tables, though, and ask you some questions. So I've just given you an overview of where the economy is and where I think it's going, which in some ways is more important. Could you connect that to really the theme of our conversation this afternoon, which is the economy and its linkages to democracy? How has the first 100 days led you to think about that?
Well, I think to step back, when we look around the world, it has been historically the case that economies that have inclusive political systems, stronger democracies, have had stronger economic growth. They build a stronger middle class that becomes a sort of a bulwark for economic progress. So from a long sort of historical tale, you'll see that basically democracies deliver results better, have stronger growth than authoritarian countries where, and this might sound familiar, authoritarian countries where certain elites are winners and losers. The government will pick winners and losers. Winners who pad the pockets of the authoritarian government or are close to the regime in other ways. And so, I do think we face this very stark choice between, again, an economy that grows more robustly for all of us and one that really does serve, the wealthy and well-connected. And I think what's really important for us always to remember is that it's the first that actually delivers better growth, stronger growth. And one of the things I'm so concerned about in the first 100 days is it's not just what the president is doing in particular on the economy, which is terrible and seems like profoundly oppositional to what he said he would do, but also the way in which he's undermining our democracy, attacking a free media that is holding him accountable for what he's doing on tariffs, attacking institutions that disagree with him. I sort of think he sees the country, or he and Bannon and Roosevelt see a country as a battlefield, and they are undermining our economic position in the world, and also hurting Americans, not just through tariffs, but the budget cuts and other things. And at the same time, basically trying to fight and weaken institutions in their way, universities, the free press, law firms. And so it's a pretty destructive force. But what they have in common, you could sort of say, what do these things have to do with each other? I think one of the things that's so important to remember is when you have governments, perhaps authoritarian governments, who want to pick winners and losers, it becomes a very extractive economy that works for a very few, and that undermines our economic growth over the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And as we know, some viewers may know, there is a group of economists who recently won a Nobel Prize writing explicitly about that and documenting it throughout history. I mean, let me respond to some of that, Neera. Two things. One is your comments made me think of what's sometimes called crony capitalism.
Yeah.
And this is the idea, and I think it's really a huge motivator for the president. People do all kinds of ridiculous backfilling, trying to explain what Trump's tariffs are up to, what he's motivated by. And a lot of it is complicated global finance and currency movements. I think what he's motivated by is this incredibly wrong-headed view that anything we import from someone is them ripping us off. So that's as wrong as you're accusing the grocery store of ripping you off or selling you groceries. But also, the idea that the more he can get countries to grovel to him and people, business folks, leaders of industry to bang on the door of the Oval Office to get an exemption, that's a good day for him. So a great example of this is what happened with Tim Cook and Apple. They big contributor to Trump, to the inauguration, to his to various Trump initiatives, and they got an exemption on their electronics, at least for a while, from the China tariffs. So crony capitalism is in play in just the way you describe. And secondly, the other thing you made me think about when you talked about compromising institutions is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
So if you go after, and they clearly have, now I get that, on alternate Tuesdays they go back and forth, they dial back, and then they go back again. But Trump clearly does not consider an independent central bank an important thing. And when you go after that institution, we've seen in other countries explicitly in the spirit of your comments, Neera, that you've really unleashed even more inflation because presidents will always juice the economy to get more growth, regardless of its impact on price pressures. So our Federal Reserve has done I think, a very good job of managing a lot of challenging dynamics lately, and that's an institution that we really don't want to see the president screw around with.
Yeah, so I do think it's important also, as we hit the 100 days, to recognize that there are limitations, that there are times where Trump has backed down, the administration has backed down, and it's when they see a force that's willing to stand up to them. Yes. Jay Powell was basically saying, you can't fire me. I'm going to do the right thing by the economy regardless. And there was a lot of fear that affected the bond ratings and other things, and the markets were crashing, and then Trump had to say, and who knows, you're right, could change next Tuesday, but he had to say, actually, I was never seriously considering firing him, and then the market took off. So I do think what's also important to remember at this time, where he does have a kind of shock and awe politics that is designed to overwhelm, so people kind of enter into a fetal position, which, people can be very good at. It's really important to remember that when people stand up, as the Liberal Party in Canada did and won their elections, or Jay Powell or Harvard University, 3 different institutions you didn't think had anything in common until recently. They actually can succeed and push back. And in some respects, Trump, after Harvard stood up, the Trump administration put out an article, or there was an article that said, oh, we didn't really mean all of that. It was like kind of a little bit of a walk down or a blink or something. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us in this.
Let's dig into that a little bit, Neera, because I think you're so right. I think it's absolutely essential to remember that resistance is not futile. And we've already seen these folks blink. The question I have in my mind, and what I'd like you to help us thrash out here, though, is let's say the Trumpies keep blinking when things, when the kind of pressure that you just described arises. And I'm going to think mostly in the economics lane. So the bond market starts to get wiggly and maybe they back off, or we could get this, quite weak GDP report tomorrow. Look, if GDP stays, in the 1 or below 1% range, unemployment will eventually start to rise, and we'll start to see real damage to job gains and the kind of things that people really pick up on. If the mortgage rate stays pretty high, which it's been kind of parked around 7%, all of that could lead them to continue blinking. If they continue, though, if that happens, if it's chaos back and forth, policy lurching, this drove me nuts. What Besant the other day called, well, Trump is applying his genius in strategic uncertainty. That's the name he gave to him. So,
also known as chaos.
Yeah. So anyway, we could end up kind of like not necessarily having a big bad recession, but just like slogging along. And just kind of downshifting from where we were, around 4th gear to something closer to 2nd or 3rd. How do you think that plays out in terms of how people feel about the economy, how people feel about the administration? In a way, it's almost harder for the opposition because you're not, well, look, there's a recession.
Yeah. Actually, let me put it in another way, which is, candidly, President Biden did the American Rescue Plan. It was a plan designed to ensure that we had a strong recovery. And because of the timing, a lot of people criticize that as spending a lot of money early on and connecting that to inflation, which is, if you think about it, a little bit of a hard connection, how much we're spending here and inflation, et cetera. But what's fascinating is people were able to really directly connect. They had something that really reminded people, or actually located inflation at the steps of the president. And here we have a much closer connection. As you know, people are still concerned about high prices. They were hoping prices would go down. Very hard to do. And so I think what's kind of remarkable is that even when we had the economic growth of the Biden administration, people were pretty angry about costs being so high. So I look at it through another lens. Donald Trump has put forward an agenda that can be directly tied to high prices, and he can pull back and make a deal here or make a deal there. But fundamentally, people have a locus for their concern about high prices, and it is the direct action of the president and what he's doing. And it might be he just pulls everything to 10% tariff across the globe, right? If that's where we end up, that is still an increase in cost for people. It is kind of like a national sales tax in a way on certain goods. And so, I think of it as, I don't know that people measure their lives in, where GDP is as much as they measure their lives and how much is their income and how much can they afford. And he's making one side of that equation a lot harder.
I think that's right. And I also think, though, that there's something we haven't seen for a very long time in this country, and you and I should, the Fed as well, but we should be proud of this, which is that the unemployment rate has been low for a very long time.
Yes.
It's just been kind of parked around 4% for month after month after year, and that's been very good for people in the job market. If, in fact, the economy slows as I predict, and at this point this is the conventional forecast. This is not just me. This is pretty much every forecaster. The unemployment rate will start to tick up month after month. I don't think we're going to see that. We're going to get the jobs for April in a couple of days. I think it's going to take a few months for that to occur. So my only addendum is that we've been used to this very stellar job market in the background. That could erode, and people will notice that. So I think all of that is right.
Yeah, but I just want to step back for 1 second. And we're always in the news. We're always watching the news, and so when things change, but it is remarkable that just a mere 100 days ago, no one was predicting a recession, and now, or very few. And now, I mean, there was lots of predictions a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. That didn't materialize, which was important. A lot of action by a lot of people. The Fed played a role, of course, but so did the Biden-Harris administration. But now we're really in a space where, because of the things you mentioned, uncertainty, other issues, we're at that space where, people are, the conventional wisdom has completely flipped, and we could be in a recession. And really, that's going to have profound impact for small businesses, families, et cetera.
Right. And if you look at what the dynamics of how that works, it's often the case that it takes months for the authorities who date these things to say there was a recession. They're always, because of the way the data comes in with a delay, they're always months late on that. So what you have to look at now are what businesses and what consumers are saying. And what you have businesses and consumers saying is really very different, to your point, than it was a few months ago. Businesses in particular, we're looking forward to tax cuts and deregulation. Market investors, same thing. And we should talk a little bit about tax cuts because they are coming and it's important. But in fact, these very businesses are now saying, and I'm quoting from lots of different anecdotes. And remember, the plural of anecdote is data. We have the anecdote. We don't have the data yet. That's a good nerd joke. I
laughed at your nerd
joke. Thank you. Showing your nerdness, which I love. We're hearing things like, I was going to actually build that warehouse.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting on my hands. I was going to increase the shelf space in my retail store. I'm holding up. I was going to build an extension on the house. I'm holding up. It is precisely that kind of pausing that is, again, at the level of anecdote right now, but aggregated up, and it tends to translate into real problems. If it's okay, I think it'd be good to turn to the budget. What are you seeing that has you most concerned? And again, I do think there are economy-democracy connections here in the budget debate and both how it's playing out, some of the gnarly process in the background, and some of the cuts that are being proposed.
Yeah, so just I think what's fascinating about the reconciliation debate that we're having, so reconciliation is basically a process by which the Congress, with a simple majority, is trying to pass massive tax cuts, skewed towards the wealthy, but massive tax cuts. And the whole debate is how to pay for it. And I think this is the choice that they're really confronted by. One is slashing health care for working class people. So they have a big target on Medicaid. 90% of people on Medicaid in this country are either working or in school. And, they talk all about Medicaid work requirements and other things, which is really designed to just cut people from Medicaid. People who Medicaid work requirements, which sound good, I appreciate that they sound good, are just like a paperwork way to cut the rolls. And so that's what we're facing, almost best case scenario. But I also think it's important to remember that on the other side, they're thinking of dramatically increasing the deficit and debt in order to pay for in order to just basically not pay for these tax cuts. So that's really where the debate is: how much harm you inflict on Americans now, or how much harm is inflicted down the road. And you and I have been part of deficit, conversations about the deficit and debt for decades. I hate to age us that way, but it is true. But one thing that is really different right now, and I'd love you to talk about this a little bit more, is really the consequences of just incredibly large debt levels at this moment when the world is kind of questioning the dollar, where you are seeing the bond market in a rickety place. And really, there is possibly a big impact on long-term interest rates that we haven't seen in the past from mass deficit spending.
Oh, man, that's a rich and troubling area to noodle over. So I just want to point out that yesterday, myself and a colleague named Ryan Cummings wrote a piece for The Contrarian on precisely these points, and I commend folks to check it out. One of the things you're referring to there is what's being called, I hate this word, but they're calling it the Sell America trade. And this is the idea that Trump, in less than 100 days, has turned safe, risk-free assets into riskier assets, so that if you're going to be a creditor lending us money, now you want a bit of a premium on the interest rate to help protect your investment a bit more, because you don't trust what these folks are up to. And from what we've seen with the chaos and the lurching and the strategic uncertainty, you shouldn't. So we are carrying make the numbers simple, $30 trillion of debt. It's about 100% of our GDP. So what's a percent on that? It's $300 billion. So when you're carrying that much debt, a nudge up in the interest rate makes your debt service a lot more expensive. So point one, that's of great concern. But point two is for what? Getting back to what you were saying a minute ago, when I look at the problem of America and our income distribution, it's not that rich people don't have enough money. It's that low-income people are struggling. And that's not new to Trump or Biden. I've been struggling for a long time. But the idea that you're going to take from the poor to give to the rich is obviously terrible. And we've had that conversation for way too long. The fact that it's still ongoing is really just an indicator of how much money has corrupted these politics. But here's another wrinkle. Low-income people are getting whacked by service cuts, Medicaid, food stamps, student lending, all in the budget. We've seen the budget now, all in the budget. They're getting whacked by to help offset the cost of tax cuts for the rich, while, and here's a new thing, while they have to face higher sales taxes, which you correctly called import tax, a sales tax on on goods and services that lower income people consume. They disproportionately consume that stuff. Imports are disproportionately consumed by the bottom half. So you have this massive whack on lower income people from the budget and the tariffs together. That bit is new.
Yeah, and I think, we sort of started off in this conversation in this space, but I wanted to come back to it, which is, this is what is amazing to me. I have to say, it feels like the longest con ever run on working class people, right? And I think it's real. Like in the first administration, there was a lot of things Trump proposed, like getting the ACA, people on the ACA are disproportionately working class people, that he was stopped from. But this administration, and you just named a few of them, is looking at higher tariffs, higher mortgage rates because of higher interest rates from its kind of chaotic actions, slashing services, and not like esoteric services. It's basic health care for people, housing services. The DOGE cuts are really hitting the safety and security of the American people. So it's such an interesting thing to me because, he's a classic sort of authoritarian populist. On the other hand, he's basically hurting the people.
Look, we have a couple minutes, but you're triggering a really big question here. Maybe if it's too big, blow it off. But so in the Biden administration, we took office to help solve that problem.
Yeah.
What you just articulated, and I'm not exaggerating when I say we woke up
every day
trying to figure out how we could deliver on exactly what you just said. And, we did pretty well. And no question, inflation was too high. Costs really hurt us. But how, in the name of everything holy, after that, are we back here, in your opinion?
Well, I think this does say a lot about inflation. And, the truth is, and just to say, you and I both worked for a president who was very proud of the fact that 70% of the jobs that were created by the legislation he worked to pass on chips and Inflation Reduction Act and clean investments, renewables, infrastructure, all of those things, 70%, 80% of those jobs went to people without a college degree. So it was very targeted on, and we very consciously thought about plants in places like Ohio or rural Georgia or Arizona, like reaching places that felt left behind. So I think this is one of the central questions as we go forward, and try to build a positive agenda, which is how do we build an economic program? Now, I think Trump is hurting the people he was claiming he was going to help, which will give people a lot of opportunity. But I look forward to your work on that economic program.
I'm going to get some help, right?
Yes,
I'm not going to do it all by myself.
That'll be a lot of help. But we're all going to work on this.
Yeah.
On how to answer this mail, and maybe it's just that in a space where we don't have that level of inflation across the globe, people will see it in a different way.
I think that's right, and I think that the way forward is, again, I'll repeat what I said a minute ago, looking right into the camera. Resistance clearly isn't futile. And so we need to obviously keep doing. I really do try to think, what have I done today to help? And I'm sure a lot of people viewing think the same thing. But my point, Neera, is that it's clearly essential for us to come up with a really clear, solid, what we're for agenda that addresses exactly what you said, which is actually delivering to the people that they promise to but are betraying on a daily basis. So we know a little bit about that because we've done it before, but clearly we've not done a good enough job in helping people understand
and selling it and messaging it and all those things.
And
but also
with the inflation backdrop, that was a tremendously difficult barrier for us to get through.
Yeah, and I think we're in a different space now where I hope that the Trump administration's policies will help us show that contrast, because they'll actually see what
I think they are.
Yeah,
I
agree.
If you look
with
at
that.
the polling, that people are onto them.
Yeah, and I would say, just to end, because you said so many times resistance isn't futile. I think it is really a critical point. It is really different to be in an administration and how it feels in the country when it's at 50% or 45% or 40% or 30%. And in terms of institutions, it'll be a very different country if we're sort of at the end of the institutions caving versus the beginning. So it is real, and those institutions will really feel differently if he's at 40 or 30% or 35%. So resistance, opposition is crucial to saving our democracy and staving off the authoritarian threat, but it's also crucial to build that economic agenda for the future.
So it seems like a great place to stop on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jen Rubin.
And I'm Norm Eisen.
I am here to announce I am leaving the Washington Post in order to co-found with Norm an exciting new online platform, The Contrarian. We are going to bring you written material, podcasts, interviews, social media, all in defense of democracy. Our intent is to combat the authoritarian force that we all face. To help us, we have an exciting array of contributors from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds to help us in this venture.
We're going to do politics, we're going to do law, but we know that any successful pro-democracy movement also has to be very vocal about culture. We'll have a humor column. We'll even have a cooking column, but we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of pro-democracy flavor.
And we're going to have pets. We're very pro-pets. So please, join us in this journey. We cannot do this without you. We want your contributions, your input, your ideas.
Thank you for joining The Contrarian.
Hi, everybody. It's Jim Acosta, and I am live with Katie Phang and Brian Tyler Cohen, two independent media stars. Katie, brand new.
Brand new.
To this space, and we're live on the Contrarian Substack channel as well as the New Republic Substack channel, and you guys are both on Substack. Katie, you just arrived. Brian, you've been here for a while, also on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And I've been here for a few months now, and I have to say it is an amazing experience. You feel liberated, you feel free, you can say all sorts of things that you weren't able to say before. Katie knows what I'm talking about. Brian, you've been doing this for some time. But Katie, let me start with you. I mean, a lot of folks are probably wondering, how are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah. I'm still kind of getting my land legs underneath me. But to your point, the Substack community has been incredibly welcoming, and the Contrarian, the New Republic, has consistently been a partner in not only defending democracy, but also making it feel like it's a completely feasible thing for all of us to do. Everyday Americans can kind of, lift their voices and get things done. So the idea of being able to do it in an independent way, and to say what you want to say, the way you want to say it, and again, to meet the urgency where it needs to be met, is the most liberating feeling right now.
Yeah, and Brian, I mean, obviously the topic for the discussion for this panel and for what they're doing at the Contrarian and the New Republic today is how is democracy doing 100 days under Donald Trump? I mean, what are your thoughts on that subject, and how has independent media been affected and impacted all of this, do you think?
Well, it's interesting because on one hand, obviously the state of democracy is pretty grim these days. And as we get deeper and deeper into the Trump administration, things look pretty bad. I mean, they seem to be getting worse and worse as his authoritarian impulses continue to let themselves show. But something that does give me hope is that, especially, look, I've been doing independent media for years and years and years now, and there does seem to be finally this embrace of independent media, of this space, and of people who are willing to your exact point, meet the moment with the urgency that it deserves, be able to say what they want to say without feeling like they're held back by some feeling of responsibility that they have to both sides everything that they say, that they have to equivocate, that if you say something negative about Donald Trump, you have to also say something negative about Democrats. And that, I think, we're finally losing that, and that has been a long time coming. And so that is something that gives me hope, that there is a sense of straight talk, at least among pro-democracy media, that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I mean, and some of this comes back to, Katie, how the media are handling themselves in this moment. And you and I both have experienced this on the other side of the coin. I mean, there are plenty of headlines to delve into. I mean, just this past week, just on Sunday night, Scott Pelley is on 60 Minutes.
That was incredibly powerful.
Having to explain how, there are corporate pressures over at CBS, that Paramount is essentially looking over their shoulder, wanting to have approval over stories that they do. And as I've been saying on my podcast, when 60 Minutes is in trouble, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, and the reason why I want to underscore what you're talking about is we were all stunned when we heard Scott say that. We shouldn't be stunned. We should actually think that should be the norm. That level of transparency and honesty about people's motivations and intentions should always be the norm. And so the fact that we were like, go Scott, we should actually be more like, no, actually, this should be the standard by which we all apply ourselves. Because when people try to obfuscate why they're saying what they're saying, when they try to hide the reasoning behind why they're reporting a certain way or coming to the stories with a certain lens, that's when they're completely betraying Americans. That's when democracy really is dying in darkness, because we're not having the light shone upon the issues the way that it should be. And just from a legal perspective, because that's my jam, right? That's my lane. There is no both sidesism when it comes to the law. You may advocate a position, but the law is supposed to be black and white. And when we get this opportunity to reach more people in independent media, and we give people the ability to have the knowledge to understand what's really at stake, that's when they feel empowered to be able to affect a change. It's not getting thousands of people to converge in one place, even though we're seeing that happening right now. It's how are we covering those thousands of people in that one place? And then how are we talking about how these issues impact them? Even just sitting down and having a cup of coffee with somebody, but knowing what the facts are is what's going to make a difference.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, I come at it from a little different perspective because I come at it from persuasion. I'm an activist. I obviously all of my brand relies on being able to be credible and honest and accurate. And look, I never had a network behind me so that I can fall back on if I screwed up. If I say something that's false, that hurts me. That's a direct hit to my reputation, to my name, and so I can't fall back and say this is MSNBC's fault. I would love to be able to say this is MSNBC's fault, but I can't. But I think from a political perspective, a persuasion perspective, the benefit of independent media at this moment is that, first of all, there are more people who are watching independent media, and there are more persuadable folks who are watching independent media. And something that was difficult for me to reconcile when I was on acting as a contributor on MSNBC was that I'm speaking to people who are largely already bought in. I'm bringing sand to the beach at this point, so to speak. And that was, look, everybody wants to get pet, right? Like, it's easy to want to go into an audience that you're comfortable with and get claps and pets from those people. But really, the work of politics is the work of persuasion. Yeah. That's a little bit more difficult, and you have to be willing to talk to people who are not already bought in. And the independent media space allows you to do that in a way that you can't do if you're on networks talking to people who are already bought in 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing that we have to talk about is the way Trump has attacked the press. I mean, he's not only done his, sort of stock and trade.
Do you know anything about that, Jim? I mean, I know this is kind of new to you, right?
Well, no, I mean, I had the experience during the first Trump administration where they took my press pass and we had to go to court and get it back. A federal judge that was appointed by Donald Trump gave me my press pass back. But they've taken it to the next level in this new administration and Trump 2.0. They've gone after the Associated Press. They have said if you are the Associated Press and you don't adopt the Gulf of America as the name for the Gulf of Mexico, which is absolutely ridiculous and silly, then you're not going to be welcome in the Oval Office in Air Force One and so on. AP had to take the Trump administration to court. They actually cited my case in all of that. But Katie, what are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, how is it that Trump can push these boundaries? Because I was saying this the other day. I sort of feel like he's cracked the code in how to hurt the press. If you look at the ABC settlement, if you look at what's taken place at 60 Minutes, and with the AP, it has cowed the press into some form of submission that we're seeing right now, and it's hard to watch.
I think it's now reached a level of uber manipulation of the Fourth Estate. It's this idea that the intimidation is going to drive the dialogue, and that's something that we have to protect, especially when it comes to independent media. It's not just the freedom to be able to report on the issues the way that we think is appropriate, but it's also to make sure that, again, there's access to the information. And that's the most troubling thing, right? It's you don't do the Gulf of America, you can't come in. We're going to put in disreputable outlets at the Pentagon now. And we're going to pull ones that traditionally are just the media sources that are going to be able to provide the facts, the truth, the evidence. I've said this time and time again. What's really at stake is the absence of critical thinking. So what we're trying to do is create a space within which we provide, in a persuadable fashion, the facts, the truth, and the evidence. It does rely on people to be able to exercise their critical thinking skills, but in this instance, you still see, though, judges that are doing the right thing. You still see rulings that are saying that you cannot restrict this access or you cannot do this. I agree, though, that there is an undeniable negative impact that we're seeing from Trump 2.0 that is making other people scared. But to Brian's point, Brian has the ability to influence how people are thinking. Yeah. You have that ability as well. And now I have an even greater ability to be able to influence how people are thinking.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to the AP for standing up for themselves. I mean, they weren't cowed in submission, but a lot of these other corporations have. And I mean, Brian, what are your thoughts when you see the way that, I mean, has Trump kind of succeeded in a way in intimidating the press?
He has, and it's not just the press. I mean, we saw what he did with the law firms. When we saw Paul Weiss, for example, capitulate because they thought that it might help them in the short term, might help them, alleviate some pain momentarily. What that did is basically embolden Trump. It showed him that, okay, he can smell blood in the water, and now he can go after a few more law firms, and then 5, and then 10, and then 15, and now he's got
$1 billion later
in pro bono legal services in a sector where he was especially weak. I mean, like, this guy is not known for succeeding in the courtroom, right?
Can he use any of this money for his legal defense after he leaves office? I mean, that's one of the questions that I have, ladies and gentlemen.
God knows he'll try.
Yeah.
And so then he saw, okay, I was able to do it with these law firms. What about these tech billionaires? And then, of course, we had Bezos and Zuckerberg and Xu all give him $1 million to his inaugural
The
fund.
original knee benders.
The original knee benders show up
Dubious honor.
on the dais behind him. Saw that he could do that with ABC News, which capitulated to the tune of $15 billion. So then he went after CBS, and of course we were just talking about what happened with their parent company, Paramount. And so in each sector, he's recognizing that all he has to do is prove that he can own one or two of them, and then the other ones fold. And that's the dangerous part of this, because where does it end? I mean, if he can exert enough pain on just a couple of the big players, then he can basically get the rest of them to fall like dominoes, and that's what he's doing, which is why it's so important. It's incumbent on folks in the independent media space who aren't over leveraged, because none of us have an e-commerce platform that we also have to think about. None of us have broader brands, parent companies that we have to worry about doing some merger or acquisition for. That's the
maybe a little merch here and there. That might be it.
A little bit of merch, but
merch pitch.
Yeah.
But like the interesting part of this is that you look at these big media conglomerates and you think, okay, how could you bully the CBSs and Paramounts and Amazons and NBC Universals of the world? But the fact is that by virtue of the fact that they have so many other properties that the federal government has a hand in issuing licenses to or approving mergers for, they're so exposed in a way that independent media just isn't. And so that's the benefit of being at this particular moment, at this particular time, when you do have a federal government that's willing to use its leverage to tamp down on the media by going after other arms of these companies.
Yeah, and that's the issue with Paramount and CBS and the Skydance deal that they want to go through, and Sherry Redstone.
Well, that's why they have to cozy up to an administration and make sure that merger gets rubber stamped. But that also bleeds into the law firm thing, because
I was going to ask you about
have
that.
mergers and acquisition partners that have portable books of business, and they are huge chunks of income to the tune of a lot of money for these big law firms. And that's the reason why there's a fear from the higher ups in terms of the managing partners, et cetera, that the people will walk with their books of businesses. And that's the reason why they are capitulating the way that they are. But you know what's amazing is people are forgetting at those upper echelons of power and money. These companies weren't built out of nothing. They were built from American support. They were built from Americans' money, right? It was our investments into them, whether it's e-commerce or otherwise. These are the things that people forget. Sometimes entire brands are built on what people gave in terms of their devotion and investment of their time in that brand, right? And these people we're all being forgotten along the way. And so if we're not beholden to big corporate overlords, if we're not owing something, then that's where the independent media gets its freedom to be able to say, you know what, we're going to call it the way it is. True calling of balls and strikes the way it was supposed to be.
And Brian, I got to ask you about this, because we've seen this in the briefing room in recent weeks, and this is really in your wheelhouse. You're seeing Caroline Leavitt bring in these new media stars on the far right. They're calling it the new media seat. Have you had a chance to sit in the new media seat, or is it only reserved for the likes of Tim Pool?
Well, I was going to say, we've got Tim Pool, we've got Sean Spicer. I mean,
where's your beanie?
It is.
When it's 75 degrees in D.C., I'm not wearing a beanie. I'm sorry.
The interesting part of that is
not going to happen.
Where was Brian Glenn from? What is it? Real America's Voice.
Marjorie Taylor Greene's
that MTG's boyfriend, right?
Yeah. MTG's boyfriend, who was so critical of Vladimir Zelensky, whose country just so happens to be at war with the biggest country in Europe, and yet his attire wasn't appropriate, but crickets when it came to Tim Pool and his beanie sitting in the White House. Yeah.
How about that blue suit?
But to answer your question, no, I do not presume that I'll be in the White House answering questions for Caroline Leavitt anytime soon. But frankly, I mean, you look at this, and it really is, I mean, it is embarrassing. To the questions that they get are so, that does a disservice to independent media, because you have the opportunity to go in there and prove your bona fides, right? And instead, the questions that they get are just so groveling and sycophantic and obsequious.
Softballs.
That I mean, if this is what independent media is, it reflects pretty poorly. Granted, there's a clear delineation between what's happening on the left and right, but
yeah.
You know.
No, well, I think what we're seeing is sort of the onset of, and maybe not even the onset, but the solidification of sort of a Trump state media in this country. And you have this sort of right-wing media apparatus over there that's willing to just sort of be his mouthpiece. And it's sort of depressing because, I mean, one of the things that I've been asking the question of is Joe Rogan really going to spend the next 4 years just sort of saying, yes, sir, yes, you're absolutely right, Donald Trump. You know, the dear leader kind of, is that what Megyn Kelly is going to do the next 4 years? Are they all going to be like these sycophantic mouthpieces? I mean, that sounds kind of boring. Sounds like more fun for us.
I was going to say, bring it on.
It remains to be seen because, you know, we are seeing some fissures. I think as things get more and more difficult, then as the tariffs continue to bear down, as 401ks continue to get gutted, as these trade deals continue to go south, whatever it may be, I think it's going to be more and more difficult for them to really sustain these positions because, to your exact point, I mean, just nodding along like it's North Korea state TV is going to get pretty rough for these people to do, especially when there's really not a lot of success for them to report on. It would be one thing if he was, look, really what he should have done is just come into office and just gone golfing. And he would probably be at high 50s approval rating right now, continue to coast on a very strong economy that he inherited from Joe Biden. Instead, he decided to beat his chest and try to prove himself this tough guy around the world, and threaten to annex half of our allies, and then threaten trade wars against the rest of the world. And we're seeing in a globalized economy how we don't have the same strength that he thinks that we have.
Well, and there's a boomerang effect. I mean, he's essentially assured the victory of Mark Carney as the new Prime Minister of Canada. He's going to remain Prime Minister of Canada.
Not only that, Poilievre lost his seat. Not only is he not the Prime Minister, he's no longer in Parliament at all because of the impact that Trump had.
Maybe he'll get a Substack. I don't know. Or
That's right.
Maybe he'll get a show on YouTube.
There's going to be a whole
a Temple beanie. Yes, that
There's going to be a whole Never Trump faction, Canada style, as the result of his impact on this election.
It's wild. And the Wall Street Journal had an editorial today, saying that Trump is on his way to having a failed second term. And when you've lost the Wall Street Journal,
yeah, that's pretty
Katie,
brutal.
That's pretty brutal.
That's a little Mean Girls.
But we're running a little short on time. But I mean, your thoughts, just to kind of start wrapping things up, as to the power of independent media in this moment. I was talking with Hamish, the head of Substack, the other night, and I was saying, the next election could be a Substack election in this country, an independent media election in this country, where those voices, those platforms are almost as important or more important than the networks and the major news outlets that we have all grown to love over the years, and maybe grown to hate a little bit over the years, but that we've become accustomed to as being part of the norm in American society. I really think we're on the verge of a new moment in media.
And I think the example of the White House press briefing room just goes to show, though, you don't need that access to be able to speak to Americans. You don't have to have a seat in front of Caroline Leavitt every day to be able to speak to Americans and tell them what's really at issue. Because in independent media, we're not only going to take those issues, but we're going to present them in a way that is completely cloaked and protected by the truth. And that is what you're not going to get from an existing Trump White House. So why not lean in more into independent media, knowing that what you're getting is unadulterated and clean versus the propaganda that's coming from the state-run machine.
Yeah, and Brian, I mean, people are smart enough now, they're savvy enough now to sniff this stuff out. They, like you were saying at the beginning of this, they see the both sidesing. They're tired of it. They're tired of the triangulation. Let me have Steve Bannon on my podcast because it'll appeal to a certain demographic audience. They're just sort of tired of the phony baloney bullshit. And you
just said bullshit.
You can say that. But you can now just talk to people and be real with them. That's what I like about it.
And look, I think the beauty of these platforms is that not only are, again, more people on them, but a lot of the people who are leaving legacy media for that exact reason are finding something refreshing in what independent media folks are able to offer up. And so that really is the best part of all of this, is that this is filling a void, at least on the left, that has been absent for so long. The right has had and invested in right-wing media for the better part of a decade now, and that's been
They're
largely
ahead of the curve.
They're far ahead of the curve, and that's because the left, the Democratic Party, has viewed legacy media as their message distribution system, for better or for worse, for the better part of that decade. But I think now people are recognizing that asymmetry that's been at play, and look, they're hungry for voices that, to your exact point, are more authentic and are going to bring unadulterated truth that isn't colored by some other priorities or financial interests that are tied along.
Yeah, and I like to tell folks, because people bring this up all the time as a question, how is it you can be opinionated or offer your take on things? Has anybody seen Good Night and Good Luck? Has anybody seen what Edward R. Murrow did back in the day? And in the strong tradition of Walter Cronkite over at CBS, who during the Vietnam War went to Vietnam, came back and said the Vietnam War cannot be won. And Lyndon Johnson said, if I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost middle America. So there is a strong tradition in media. It's almost like we've been brainwashed into thinking by the likes of Fox News and so on that an anchorman can't tell you the goddamn truth. But they should be able to tell you the goddamn truth. And right now, the media is under attack in this country, and it takes strong independent voices like both of you to make sure that we remain the sort of defenders of the people. Katie, any final thoughts?
I just want to emphasize that something like this that we're sitting and being a part of right now, I just love the idea that not only are you recognizing the dangers, but we're also leaning into the optimism of knowing that there are people that are fighting. I'm thrilled to be able to go to court with Norm Eisen and State Democracy Defenders Fund and other amazing organizations.
Has Norm been in court? He's been in.
Norm, I don't know. Have you been in court anytime soon? But
Has Norm been out of court?
I don't know. That's a good point.
Fleetingly to be able to spend time with us. But the idea to be able to go and fight the fights where they need to be fought, that's the thing. I want people to understand that are tuning in right now that these battles are being fought even when maybe you're not tuned in, and these conversations you're having as quickly and as efficiently as you are, Brian, and in your reach, and you, Jim. This is that luxury that we're getting right now from Substack and from other type of forums and platforms. And so I'm grateful to know that I'm not in this fight alone, that you're doing it, that everybody here at the Contrarian, the New Republic, you, Brian, that we're all together in this because we do have strength in numbers.
Yeah, and Brian, final thoughts. You have hope as we're
I do. I do, because I think something that I've been waiting to see for a really long time is this idea, to Katie's exact point, of fight. And we have, look, coming from the perspective of somebody, I am an out and out Democrat, and so I have been looking at a Democratic Party that has largely been much more feckless and ineffective compared to the Republican Party for the better part of a decade now. And so to see that the litmus test for Democrats, has gone from, okay, is this person progressive? Is this person a moderate? I think right now what people are looking for, regardless of whether where you land on the ideological spectrum, is whether you're willing to fight. And that is such a welcome change for me, who's been really begging and pleading to see some of that same fight. I mean, look, we have seen the best distillation of the Democrats' fecklessness up to this point has been how if the parliamentarian, for example, says that the Democrats can't do something, Democrats go, well, parliamentarian says no, and so that's it. What could we possibly do? And the Republicans get told no by the parliamentarian, and they say, well, we're going to go ahead and fire the parliamentarian and just get a new parliamentarian, or pretend that the parliamentarian doesn't exist. And it's really difficult from my perspective, from an outsider's perspective, to be able to see that and to see what Mitch McConnell does and to see how we fight back or don't fight back against that. But I think that we are finally entering an era where there is enough pressure on Democrats that, A, if you want to stay in office, then you're going to be able to bring the requisite tools to make sure that you can succeed there and fight back there. And B, if you don't, that's no problem, but you're going to get replaced by somebody who will. And we've already seen some of these older school Democrats start to drop out and announce their retirements and make way for real generational change. And that's something that does give me hope as we move forward.
Well, you bring up a couple of good points. One is, let's give a shout out to Dick Durbin, who is retiring, and he knows when it's time to retire, so there isn't some calamity as a result of him not retiring. I'll just put that out there, off topic. Just say that as we're speaking here. But Katie, Brian raises a really interesting thing that we should maybe close out the conversation with, and that is I sort of get the sense that progressives in this space now kind of feel like it's okay and maybe a healthy and good thing to be a little critical of the Democrats and say, you know what, guys, you kind of screwed some things up here and there, and you haven't been tough enough. And as Brian was saying, people want to see a little fight out of you. And they're not seeing it right now.
I balk a little bit at the labels because the labels, I think, kind of pigeonhole people into a pre-existing space. I think it's time for the New World Order. And what that is do you give a shit? Do you care enough about me and my family to want to fight for me? Because I care enough about you and your family to want to fight for you. Yeah. That's what we need to be focusing on. It's not so much, did I have it right? Was I carrying the right banner? Was the clarion call loud enough? And that's why people are finally seeing the light. People's, come to Jesus moments happen at different times and for different reasons. I just want to make sure that you're just as invested in what my future is going to be for my family and my loved ones as I am for you. Because if I'm putting it all on the line, you better be ready to do it for me. That is my standard. It's not finally people have this huge, like epiphany that it's time to do these things. And so for me, that is what I think is the gauge of whether or not we're ready to meet the moment where it needs to be met.
I mean, that's a wonderful thought. I mean, one of the things that I tell folks all the time is that I'm less concerned about what's called Trump derangement syndrome as I am Trump depression syndrome, which is what we saw a lot of during the interregnum period between the election and the inauguration of Donald Trump. And you do get the sense now, to Brian's point and to your point that was so eloquently put a few moments ago, Katie, people are kind of picking themselves up and dusting themselves off and getting engaged. And one of the things that you see in independent media in places like Substack is that engagement. And, I tell people all the time, the people who watch my show, people watch Brian's show and your show, these folks are engaged, they know what the hell they're talking about, and they are passionate. And you better not bullshit around with them in this very important moment. And I think, Katie, and just to close with some final thoughts here, you're absolutely right. In the final analysis, where we are right now as a country is not a left-right country. I mean, people might still view it through that prism, and maybe the 10 o'clock cable newscast or whatever channel still frames things in those fashions. But in my view, and perhaps you'll agree with me, we're in a moment where it's pro-democracy versus anti-democracy. And you can be from any political stripe at this moment, but we need to know where you stand on that particular issue.
100%. I think it's become a completely binary issue now, and that is actually a luxury we usually don't have, but it is now crystal clear. Yeah. If you can come down on the right side of history, I'm willing to die on that hill. Yeah. Why not? Yeah,
when they're taking four-year-old little kids with cancer who are U.S. citizens and sending them off to Honduras, I think that's a pretty clarifying moment.
Yeah, I mean, God willing, we get to look back at this moment in 2025 and recognize that when we were on the precipice, did you stay silent? Which side were you on? And we'll be able to look back and say that the people who stood up and fought were fighting for something that we were able to preserve.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Katie, and thank you, Brian. Great discussion. Thanks to Norm and the great folks at the Contrarian. Thanks to the great folks at the New Republic. This has been an excellent discussion. I've enjoyed it very much and want to thank all of you for tuning in, and continue to tune in to Brian's show and Katie's show and my show if you have a little extra time. But for now, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
I think people are starting to see the harsh reality.
Kumar dedicated himself to make our family's American dream reality. That dream was shattered on March 12 when he was abducted and disappeared.
Community leaders and advocates are reaching out to immigrants to make sure they know their rights.
Not just with the case of Kumar, but there's so many other cases, you've seen the video.
They just handcuffed him and took him, I don't know what to do.
White House officials say they're only targeting those with violent criminal records.
That's the narrative. People are getting caught in the crossfire.
You and your mom are going to work, and suddenly they're taking your mom for no reason.
ICE agents all masked up, rounding up whoever. A lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear.
The mistakes have to be corrected. You can't deport gay hairdressers seeking asylum.
This is a real human being who is being locked away in a hellhole. And I want people to understand what is at stake.
Mohsen has been at the forefront of peace and strengthening ties between Palestinians and Israelis.
If he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
It's going to be decide whether we're a country of laws or whether we're going to let Trump and his lawless gang of thugs take us down a path in which anyone can be chucked into some foreign prison. Now they are taking the position that once they've done this, they can't get you back. And that should be horrifying to every single American.
It's going to take in all of society to ensure that this administration is subject to the laws and the Constitution.
It's very hard to find hope, no matter how much damage they are trying to do right now. The United States is still the United States, and it's in our hands to change the future of our country.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian, and I am back. I brought with me this time two of the finest lawyers that I know. Vanita Gupta, who is the Associate Attorney General in the prior administration, has a long and storied career in civil rights and other aspects of the legal profession. And we have Asha Ranganpour, who is a former special agent of the FBI and is now the assistant dean at the Jackson School of Diplomacy at Yale. At Yale. When we decided to put the panel together, I thought there is a connection between corruption and civil society. And 50 days ago, that was true. It seems to be even more true now, because we have seen this pattern of Trump trying to corrupt civil society institutions, law firms, colleges, all sorts of independent players in order to bend them to his will, and in the process get them to betray their professional values, their independence. Are you surprised that there has been the really concerted effort to go after these independent players? And if so, how have they done in responding?
Well, it's thank you for hosting this conversation, and I'm so glad to be here with both of you. I think that everyone had a vision and understood that the retribution agenda was going to be quite serious for the president. But I will say that I didn't see the law firm thing coming. I did not imagine executive orders out of the White House that would singly target law firms by name. And then when that started to happen, I think I might have taken for granted, as did apparently a lot of us, that law firms would recognize that if they didn't stand up to fight what is a blatantly unconstitutional order. This is not these were not orders where lawyers put their heads together and had a committee and said, wait, like, what are the claims? Is this legal? What can we? These are blatantly unconstitutional orders. We started to watch, and when Paul Weiss capitulated, that day actually felt among the worst of the last 100, to be honest with you, for me. There are a lot of things that have been terrible that have happened. But I think what really kind of shattered me was the fact that these are lawyers. Yes, they're a business. I get that. But that we all took an oath as lawyers to the Constitution. And so to capitulate in this way as a group of elites that are making millions and millions, I don't begrudge them making their millions, but to not be able to hold the line and say we are not going to capitulate to what are blatantly unconstitutional orders threatening our existence was really, really shocking. And thank goodness there have been many law firms that have stood up, and 500 that signed the amicus brief in support of Perkins Coie when it was targeted. But I do think that this was a moment that actually was a warning for the rest of civil society, for the universities, for the nonprofit organizations and the foundations to understand that A, this was real, and B, the only way through this truly was through collective action, upholding the Constitution, not capitulating to Donald Trump.
I have to ask Yale alumni, her view of Harvard, which is a little bit of a loaded question. But obviously universities were another place where he targeted in a very pernicious way by using the excuse of anti-Semitism and the alleged failure for these institutions to combat it, to threaten massive penalties, loss of funding, really very powerful clubs that the administration has. Has the academic community steadied itself? Has Harvard and others standing up, do you think, kind of corrected and given them a sense of purpose, perhaps, in pushing back?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a real turning point when Harvard stepped up and said no. And I will say, just to give a shout out to my alma mater, I mean, Princeton's President Christopher Eisgruber, was among the first to really push back. And I think Princeton may not receive as much federal funding as some of these other institutions, so they perhaps had more latitude to do that. But I think there was a voice out there. And then when I think Harvard stepped up to the plate as well and filed their lawsuit, universities are an institution where the leadership at the top really matters in terms of, the elite universities, because they will then essentially set the tone for everything else. We see this in other areas. For example, the U.S. News rankings, for example. When the top schools abandon them, everybody else feels like they can follow suit. And I think this is what you saw with universities. And I'm happy to see that they have not necessarily followed the law firm model. Because I think with the universities, it's very clear what their core values are, that they cannot abandon to remain what they are. And academic freedom is at the heart of that. And what the Trump administration did, they just pushed the envelope too far. We saw that they were getting away with some stuff with Columbia, but then they wanted to control hiring of faculty. They wanted to control admissions. They wanted to control the curriculum. And at that point, I don't think that Harvard had any choice. And I think that there's now, 140 universities that have signed on to a letter. And I do think that they are standing together.
By the way, don't you remember, it was a mistake, you see, that letter went out to Harvard, which is the ultimate dog ate your homework kind of excuse.
Well, I think it's a lesson that as soon as there is some pushback, this is the classic case, and we see this in different contexts, but they step back. Was it a mistake? I don't know. Or was it that they realized they had pushed too far? And I think this is a case of just straight up bullying, and you just need to stand up to the bully.
Yeah, there was a lot of news reporting, too, that Harvard was negotiating with the White House in the lead up to the letter that I really do think pushed too far. And that's where I just have been really heartened by the momentum from, people that are making calls to friends in high places. I mean, at the law firms thing, that was happening, too. And people should resign. A lot of people were getting very involved in this effort who may have been otherwise on the outside. And the same thing was happening with Harvard. Everyone was kind of on eggshells waiting to see what Harvard was going to do. And I think it mattered that the media kept talking about it. People kept talking about, well, what is the endowment for? Like, if Harvard can't fight, who can fight? And so it was a really powerful moment. I agree, when it was kind of the opposite of Paul Weiss, where it felt like, the addition of incredible momentum to push back against the intense bullying and kind of retribution agenda and kind of pushing institutions to do things according to a very political agenda and really breaking the heart and value system of civil society. And I am excited now by the fight and the energy that is behind it. I'm not going to overstate it, because I think we have to keep propping up the leadership at these institutions to make sure that they do the right thing, because sometimes the incentives are pretty intense on the other side. But I do think it takes a lot of work from all of us seeing ourselves as invested in the future of these institutions and organizations. These are not just like ethereal institutions that live out in the middle of nowhere. These are core to our democratic functioning.
And I just want to add on to that. They're core to our democratic functioning and our society in that, for example, with Harvard, the funding they get, I know people like to think that they just get all this funding and maybe they're just, sitting around tossing money around within Harvard or something, but this goes to research that benefits all of us. The Harvard research benefits the hospitals, not just even in Massachusetts, but across the country. And the synergy between universities and the government, for universities to be a focus of innovation and creating things that the government cannot do on its own, is so critical. That, I think educating the public on the role that these institutions play, we can do maybe even more easily with universities than, say, with law firms who, represent particular clients and people may not see a direct benefit from what they get. And I'll also add, this is nonpartisan. Harvard actually found Republican lawyers to represent them, which I thought was also really powerful. And by the way, their donations spiked as soon as they sent that letter. It went up in the hours right after. So there's broad support for it as well.
Well, sometimes doing the right thing actually is good business. I want to shift gears just a little bit and draw on your experience in particular, Asha, about the foreign corruption element. This administration announced off the bat they were not going to enforce certain laws regarding foreign corruption. Registering as a foreign lobbyist, the law that requires public and private companies operating overseas to abide by the same laws that they would in the United States, meaning, no, you can't pay a bribe to this dictator. Talk to us a little bit about the damage that kind of stance does, not only on the economic side, but on the national security side, and what that makes way for if foreign actors take advantage of that.
Yeah, so the framers of the Constitution basically had two big things that they wanted to guard against, which are self-dealing and foreign influence. And the Trump administration considers these two great tastes that go great together, apparently. And we saw a little bit of this in the first administration with the violations of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, with the Trump Hotel, and the issues with Russia interfering in the election. But they're really quite brazen in taking down every guardrail. So you mentioned a couple, not really enforcing FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act anymore, disbanding the FBI Foreign Influence Task Force, standing down the global engagement centers, monitoring of foreign influence. The head of the NSA was just fired because of Laura Loomer. This is still not clear to me exactly what was going on there. He also headed U.S. Cyber Command, which engaged in offensive cyber operations against foreign influence. So what do these things mean? It means that foreign actors can influence our members of Congress. It means that there can be disinformation operations to help sway public opinion and perception in ways that benefit those actors. And even things like USAID, dismantling that opens a space for where we used to have U.S. soft power, our own influence in the world, for countries like China to step in. And this is really dangerous because it means that what is controlling decisions is not the people anymore. It is the agenda of these foreign actors, and in many ways, there might even be sort of a implicit willingness to coordinate between our government and foreign actors. You scratch my back and we'll scratch yours, which obviously is not in our interest because these are hostile adversaries.
Yeah, and that all happened, and what was really kind of shocking to a lot of us who were just in the Justice Department was that the first set of personnel that were actually improperly kind of removed, moved aside, reassigned was the national security leadership, the career leadership that had been at the Justice Department for decades, that were and they were not present in the morning briefings that were very typical for the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to be briefed on. And this breakdown of the national security infrastructure is something that has been alarming to all of us who understand that infrastructure and the people who make it up is like vital to the health and well-being of our country. I think the other piece that I think has been really worrisome is that when they dismantled the Foreign Influence Task Force, it came at the same time that they dismantled the Election Threats Task Force, and the impact, and Asha was talking about this, on our elections, where we know that there have been very deliberate campaigns by foreign adversaries to influence through social media, through campaigns, through disinformation, and kind of this dismantling of a focus by across the government, a federal government focus on this concern about what is the 26th election going to look like and what is the 28th election going to look like without these types of guardrails and kind of focused federal law enforcement attention, I think is something that we now have to really think about. CISA has been basically, rendered it's been neutered in a lot of ways. And so what can folks on the outside do to actually shore this up, especially now that tech companies have also walked away from a lot of what they were doing before. So this is, I think a lot of people and smart minds are trying to really think about this right now, but this is something that we are only beginning to really grapple with.
And not for nothing, Jen, but also the people in charge of these agencies have not been vetted in the way that in prior administrations they have been. One of the things that you normally screen for in a background check is the possibility for foreign influence. And these people were not vetted with the kinds of background checks that we usually use for people in positions of public trust with access to sensitive information. And there are a lot of questions around people like Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel about their, interactions, connections, sympathies with countries that, do not have our best interests at heart.
I want to pick up where you said the other half of the Constitution is supposed to be about self-dealing. We have seen, and the State Democracy Defenders Fund just put out a report on this, on the absolute betrayal of any sense of separation between the president's business interests and the president's obligations. And we've seen this in his crypto business. He's opened one before he became president. He's opened another. And he's even talking about creating a sovereign wealth fund, which is something that you'd expect from the King of Saudi Arabia, which is essentially a slush fund controlled by the monarch who could go and then purchase Donald Trump's crypto, which is kind of shocking. What can you tell us about how far this departs from our standards and what happens when these standards erode slowly over time and the president is the one who's doing it? It's not an underling, it's the president of the United States.
No, you go ahead. Go. Well, the crypto piece is really alarming, right? So Trump has been, he sold his meme coin. Recently, he had the biggest purchasers of his meme coin come to the White House for dinner, I believe. Yes. So this is such a blatant pay-to-play scheme. There's also this idea of creating a cryptocurrency stockpile, which to me is a little bit alarming since now he has his own cryptocurrency and it's not really clear if our U.S. Treasury is going to end up on the blockchain. I don't even know what's happening right now. But yeah, I mean, it all feels so quaint back in the days of Iran-Contra where Reagan was, funneling money to, the Contras or whatever. I mean, this is really on a whole different level, which really goes, as you just mentioned, really allows foreign actors to straight up pay and who knows what they might be getting in return. I'll just add that the Supreme Court's immunity decision from last year essentially makes it impossible to prosecute bribery for the president, right? So here we are.
And, to me, a lot of this, it's like the oligarchies, like the oligarchs controlling our government. It really, like the Elon Musk face of government and the kind of entry that he had to dismantle the federal government and to destroy federal service and without very much knowledge at all of what government did. And just this notion that just because his money, the role his money played in the election and then the role that it played in really the project of Doge, and it is really, it's like hard to kind of wrap your head around, to be honest with you. And I think that it is there is a lot that we don't fully know and understand these 100 days in about the role of kind of the pay to play and the role of this, like the wealthy oligarchs who are having such influence over the functioning of the U.S. government. And I think that's work that we need to do for the next 100 days, is to really unpack this and explain to the American people what is wrong with this model.
And, you know, it is remarkable that this is a operation that was supposed to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And here is someone who is a massive contractor with the U.S. government, who's busy cutting off services for other people. He's been in the Defense Department.
SpaceX, he's getting massive contracts, like, you know, from the federal government, and yet,
and Doge itself is literally an advertisement for his own meme coin.
Yes. Yes.
And it's not even a real agency. You called him a contractor. Do we actually know what role he plays in our constitutional structure?
Well, he's a contractor in his business and in the supply that he makes. That we have contracted out our space business largely to a private entrepreneur.
But Elon Musk has sort of also been this X factor, if you will.
Yes.
In this, he's sort of this extra constitutional player.
I mean, but then they fixed it when they, you know, started to get challenged through litigation and gave him a title, which is why there's a time limit, and he's, you know, whether Tesla's stock is falling is the main impetus or because he's timed out. But this has been, you know, again, I think there's a lot more to uncover and discover on this that I don't think the American people, including myself, fully understand and appreciate.
Well, and to that point, Vanita, you know, the transparency is a fundamental pillar of democracy. And what I think that is the piece, or at least one of the pieces that has been dismantled. Transparency is the flip side of corruption.
Yes.
Right? You can't fight corruption if you do not have channels for sunlight. And so when you shut down things like IGs, inspector generals, and enforcement mechanisms, you're basically quashing the ability of the American people to know what's going on. So, you know, really what we can hold out hope for is maybe after the midterms that we might have congressional hearings, which is another form of transparency. But I'm not really sure where we would find out.
Well, this is actually, I think, brings us back to the beginning of this conversation, which is there has been an effort to dismantle the structures of accountability, not only within the federal government, and you named some of them, but I think what the effort to kind of dismantle civil society on the outside, which largely exists. It exists outside of government, and there's a big cohort that provides key services and programs to the American people, but also a big part of American civil society that holds government accountable. And when you have an administration that is seeking to break that infrastructure because you disagree with being held accountable, you disagree with the opposition holding you, challenging your policies, et cetera. To me, this is why it's important to connect these dots to understand the kind of the broad ecosystem and what the agenda really is. And what is, I think, really important is civil societies fighting back. And that is, but this thing about holding the government accountable, a lot of that mission resides with civil society outside, especially most importantly when the federal government structures break down.
It also depends upon a separate branch of government, which is found in Article 1 called the Congress of the United States.
Oh, wait, I thought we were done with that.
Yes, and they seem to have been written out. Now, you talk about transparency. In a normal functioning political system, the Congress would be subpoenaing, would be investigating, would be holding public hearings. Is any of this going to fall within the purview of anybody in Congress any time?
Can I just say before Asha, also would be protecting its own institutional authority, which it clearly has ceded when the president's assuming all of the spending powers that actually reside with Congress.
Exactly. So talk a little bit about how Congress should be playing a role in all this and the complete abdication of Article 1, which is the Congress.
Well, you know, I think we have a tendency to think that the courts are going to save us. But the January 6th case is an example of where I think Congress actually did so much more, or was able to bring so much more to our understanding of what happened than the courts, because the courts are limited by, all kinds of obstacles that they have to follow. But the hearings about January 6th laid out so much that we now have this extensive criminal record or extensive congressional record of what happened. So that transparency is really important, and especially when, as in the case of the courts, in terms of the accountability, part of the reason they're going after the lawyers is because courts are an institution where you can get transparency and discovery. They don't want that. They don't want people representing these clients and challenging their policies. So they're shutting down the lawyers. They're shutting down the internal government mechanisms. As you said, there's only so many institutions in civil society that can kind of make up that gap.
In our remaining time, I want to ask each of you about how this gets fixed in the future, provided that the Trump people leave office at some point. Some people have argued that we need a whole set of new laws, new regulations, new structures, and others have banked on return of democratic norms. Now that Trump has displayed writ large all of the loopholes, all of the cracks, all of the deficits, do you think we're going to need a legislative tsunami to repair this? Do you think we just need people in government who are dedicated to clean government, to abiding by the Constitution? Where do you see the correction?
So I think that work to think of the rebuild, and Asha and I were talking about this, needs to start now. Yeah. And I think because it takes time to figure this out. And I don't think it should be a return to what was there before. There were things that were not working in government. Now, DOJ didn't really seem to care about what was working and what was not working. They were just wholesale kind of laying federal workers off. But I think that work needs to happen now, and there's going to be a need for some legislative reforms, actually, because our norms clearly did not hold and got broken very quickly. And so what norms need to actually be legislated to protect our democracy? I think that's a big question. Obviously, personnel is policy, but personnel is very dispensable. And so I do think that we need to think about what are the mechanisms that we need to put in place to rebuild anew, not return to old. There were things that were broken. There were things that were corrupt about the government, et cetera. How do we envision kind of a new way of having federal government impact in our communities around the country, and what does that rebuild look like? I think that work needs to start right now.
Yeah, I think, we're going to enter a phase like we did after Watergate, which led to a lot of reforms and a lot of extra guardrails that could not be taken for granted anymore. The Ethics in Government Act of 1978, the restrictions on how presidents can use tax returns, et cetera. So that is going to happen as well. I also think that at some level, we need to return to this idea of public virtue. Because there's only so many guardrails that you can create, but you have to put people in these positions who actually feel an obligation to the greater good. Because I just don't know how many things you can possibly legislate. So that belongs to the people. And I think it's really important that people not feel apathetic because of the corruption. I think there is a tendency to be like, everything's corrupt, we're just going to give up. But we can't. And we have to kind of want better people in these positions, and then also create some of these guardrails.
Last question for both of you. Are you optimistic that the American people still want a democratic government, a clean government?
I am. I think we are seeing a lot more momentum in that direction today. And for me, this is not a partisan effort. This truly is about countering the authoritarianism that's taking root. I am hopeful, though. I don't think that this is going to last. I think it is going to be long and devastating. But I am so excited by the energy. It was, I think, in the early weeks, it felt like, where is everyone? What are we doing? But we've got momentum now in the courts. We've got momentum. You've seen people taking to the streets. You've got people that are organizing. And to me, that's what, despair is not an option. Despair is like a tool of the privileged. We can sit around and cast stones or shut down and say, I'm just not going to watch the news. But the reality is more and more people are seeing how they can be actors in their democracy. but it's going to take work. And I think above all, it's going to take community and community building. And that's why, I wanted to speak here at the Contrarian. It is important to understand that when you're at home and feeling despair, there's actually a lot of us out there that really love this country so much, love its history, love its future, and are going to roll up our sleeves or have rolled up our sleeves to do the hard work to make sure that this country can actually get through this and then start the path again to live up to its ideals.
Asha, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, so I do have hope. I think in some ways, the silver lining of the Trump administration taking it to the extreme that it has in these first 100 days makes us realize very early exactly what the plan is and exactly where we are. And we're no longer in this boiling frog situation. We've been dropped in immediately with the forced disappearances, with the Doge, with the dismantling of things that are affecting people on an everyday basis. So I think we know what's at stake, and I think that's actually a benefit to us, because then we know exactly what we're fighting for. It's not all cloudy. So I would like to think that, as Vanita just said, is encouraging people to get mobilized in a way that we weren't before.
I want to thank both of you, Asha, Vanita. I think you would agree that the quality of discussion that you have heard from these two guests and our other panel really proves the strength of independent media, to have the luxury of time, to ask people questions, to listen, and to learn from them. It's been a privilege being with you, and thank you so much for joining us. You are definitely contrarians, both of you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
We're going to head out to the first office, and then you're going to tell your story, and then we're going to go to the next office, and then we'll just keep going on.
I was at the NIH for 3 years. Until last Saturday, I worked for the National Institutes of Health at the Office of AIDS Research, which directs all of the HIV funding that's used for research and making people with HIV's lives easier through the NIH. I got an email at like 8 p.m. on a Saturday night from a HR person that I didn't know, and it said that my performance was not up to the standard of the agency, despite me having like perfect performance reviews for the last 3 years. And they didn't provide any proof either. Every single person at the NIH that was fired received the exact same letter from the same email address, so obviously it was like a blanket firing of everyone.
Step out that way, this room isn't too crowded.
I was working at USAID in the HIV/AIDS supply chain team. I was fired a month ago today because I was a federal contractors. We were dismissed after 12-hour notice. Benefits ended that night. Health insurance ran out 2 days later. The company I work for was a federal contractor. They employ 450 of us in the Bureau of Global Health. All of us were terminated. I mean, it's a joke. None of this is actually about efficiencies. It is being run by 5-year-old toddlers. All of us chose to work for the federal government to make this world a better place. And clearly what we see right now with Doge is if it doesn't serve Elon Musk, it then doesn't actually matter. We're about to see massive increase in disease, and we're about to see our American economy become the laughingstock of the world.
Well, hello. I'm Michael Tomasky. I'm the editor of The New Republic, and this is assessing the first 100 days of Donald Trump. How is democracy holding up? And this panel is dedicated to protecting fair elections and pluralism. Hasn't exactly been on the front lines because the next election's kind of far away and Trump's been busy with a lot of stuff. Nevertheless, they have found time to mess with elections too. And that's what we're here to talk about with eventually 2 guests. But right now, we are joined by 1 guest, but she's plenty enough to hold down the fort. Maria Teresa Kumar is the founding president and CEO of Voto Latino, which you have been for how many years?
So I'm one of the co-founders. So why do we have to go down that path? we are 21 years.
First question.
We are 21 years young today.
21 years.
Not today. No.
Yeah.
21 years young this
Yeah,
year.
This year.
So,
Well, that's quite an achievement. It's the largest Latino voting rights and advocacy group in the country. Is that a fair description of what you do?
Very proudly, we have registered a little close to 2 million folks since our founding, and 250,000 in the last election alone.
Wow.
And we basically also reach roughly 6.5 million people a month through our social media platforms, talking to them about their rights and how to get involved and mobilizing them so that they see that their vote actually does have impact.
Great. So let's get into it. So we've heard from other people at this conference who are engaged in these frontline battles, trying to defend workers who've been fired and so forth. On the voting rights front, things haven't been quite that immediate, although it is an alarming situation. So why don't you tell folks what you've been doing these last 100 days?
Sure. First of all, I have to say, Michael, that I'm absolutely thrilled to have this conversation because I have been a New Republic junkie since I was 16 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And so don't do the math, but I feel so privileged to have this conversation
So for 8
right
years
now.
then.
Right?
Yeah.
No, we don't want to be that. We don't want to be 16. It's tough these days. But in all fairness, one of the things that this administration has done very effectively is identify a roadmap to ensure that they could remain in power for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that we started way back actually in 2020 was how do we modernize our election systems, but also how do we make sure that we have the right apparatus in place to fight when people try to challenge folks that have cast a ballot quite legally. Yeah. And I preface this by saying is as a reminder, that is, hi Maya, as a reminder is that there has been no significant proof of voter fraud. In fact, in the last elections that Donald Trump has been elected, every single state, all 50 of them, have been able to verify and certify a fair and free election. So this nonsense that people are coming out of the woodwork and voting illegally is looking for a problem that does not exist, but it is trying to create a system that divides Americans simply based on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
Because it disproportionates a system that divides Americans simply based on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
Because it disproportionately impacts Latinos, African Americans, Asians, and Native Americans. And so since 2020, Voto Latino has had close to 10 lawsuits in Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And I am glad to say that we have been successful in beating back these in all of the cases except for the 3 that are still outstanding. Yeah. And that is because we have now had to realize that it's not enough to register a voter and get them out to vote, but also to hold states to account that the efforts that a citizen goes through to participate in our democracy, that their efforts actually get rewarded and not challenged.
All really important. And we'll talk about it more. Now, we are joined now by our second panelist. Maya Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. That's a national umbrella organization of some 240 human rights and civil rights, including Voto Latino. So there you go. Well, obviously, the pinnacle of Maya's career was when she was a columnist for the New Republic, which she had to quit when she took this job. But
there's no question.
Yeah, but she's got a pretty good job now. Maya, thanks for joining us. I'll start by asking you the same question that I started with for Maria. I imagine you've been probably pretty busy these last 100 days. What have you been up to?
Besides yelling, screaming, shaking my fists, I think the bottom line is particularly, and building off of what Maria Teresa has said, is, we've been fighting. And the way we have been fighting is, one, together, recognizing that it's not just 240 plus national organizations. It's that what all the organizations across our coalition represent are people who work, are people who are struggling to pay the rent, are people who are struggling to figure out childcare, are people who absolutely want to have a voice in who leads us. and who want to make sure their kids can get a decent education. And every single thing we have seen over the past 100 days has been an attack on all those things. One, with the poison pill of propaganda. So we do a lot of public education work. So ensuring that people know the facts, understand why they may have lost a book from the bookshelf that was just a history book that taught about the history of this country, whether it was about the destruction of the Department of Education and what that means for kids who have disabilities. But it's also in Congress. I mean, we also have a C4. That just means we lobby. We are not partisan. We don't tell people who to vote for, but we do talk about what to vote about, and we do talk about what leaders should do with the power of the pen that we, the people, gave them. And so, for example, the SAVE Act, I don't know if you all started covering that. It's misnamed. It should be called the Save Us Act, by which we mean people in power who want to make sure it's harder for people to vote, that simply want to claim that you should have to prove with a passport or with a birth certificate that what the state said you could do lawfully, you can do, which is go to a voting booth and a ballot box.
Now, to your average person to whom that might not sound onerous, both of you, Maya first, then Maria Teresa, explain why that is, in fact, onerous for many people.
So it's a really important question, because you're right, particularly for those people who have no problem getting a passport, have one, or know where their birth certificate is. The problem is a third of voters say they can't easily put their hands on either. And we also have a government, by the way, we've just gutted, right? We just saw an administration say we don't need public servants. That makes it harder to actually get that passport if you don't already have one. And you have to have money. And you have to have some ability to know, maybe it's getting access to a computer and getting online, but you have to pay a fee. We take for granted how many people in this country are struggling just to figure out how to feed their families till the end of the month. Yeah. We forget how hard it is for some people to know where and how to get this information. We forget about people who are elderly. We have people in some states with what we call strict voter ID laws that say you have to have, this is even state-level identification, who didn't get a birth certificate because where they were born and when they were born. So it's easy to forget when you have money, when you have the ability to travel, when you can go get a passport or know how to go get your birth certificate. It simply is not that easy for most Americans. But I think on top of that, what we have to add is there's also a greater intimidation factor to even go try and get it. Yeah. And for a lot of people in communities of color who already distrust government, this is just making them feel even less able to go to a government office.
Let's just tell people quickly what we're talking about, to be sure. As Maya said, is grossly misnamed. It's the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the SAFE Act, passed by the House of Representatives in April, I think. Probably not going to become law. It's not going to make it through the Senate. It's not going to make it through a filibuster. But there's an executive order that says something very similar, which we'll get to as well. But Maria Teresa, talk about some of the other aspects of this SAFE Act that are problematic.
There's no democracy building on the SAFE Act, right? Because we're talking, one, about this erroneous methods to get an ID, but it also can potentially disenfranchise up to 69 million American women. Because if you do not have your birth certificate that matches your current ID, you're going to have to figure out that journey of how you do that. This is a modern day type of poll tax, to be very clear, for all intents and purposes. If we're looking at how it impacts rural communities, they're basically saying that you cannot do mail-in ballots. 51% of rural Americans rely on mail-in ballots. Yeah. It's basically saying that if you don't have if you do not have your ballot in by Election Day, even though it's postmarked, it's not going to be counted. That sounds innocuous until you realize that in Pennsylvania, 84% of mail-in ballots came on Election Day or after.
Or after, right.
Pennsylvania is absolutely a battleground state. This is not about, this conversation that the Republicans and the Trump administration is trying to have is asymmetrical. It's not about protecting democracy. It's basically trying to say who can and cannot vote. It's going to be disproportionately the wealthy. Instead of modernizing and moving forward, we're going back to an era where people are going to be considered almost 3/5 of a person, to be quite candid. And that's a grotesque analogy, but that is where they are trying to move us forward. Instead of having conversations of what we need to do with our institutions in the 21st century, they're trying to pull us back. And I do think that when you speak to the American public, regardless of their political stripes, what has been a commonality among us and in a place of agreement, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, has been this idea of the sanctity of the voting booth and ensuring that every American has access to it. And they're meddling with that. One of the things that Voto Latino we've been able to do in the last, just making tweaks in the last 3 months, is provide as much information online around the SAVE Act, how people can actually make sure that they're providing, getting the information, getting prepared. And I can tell you that since January until today, our online presence and people sharing information has gone up by 8%. People are hungry for real information because no one is talking to them how they actually play a part in safeguarding the democracy once they voted.
I want to go to Maya, but I want you quickly to explain. You use the figure 69 million women, which I want people to be clear about is women who have married and taken their husband's name. Just
correct. Yes.
Quickly.
Well, I think you explained it, Michael, very effectively. So yeah. So if 69 million American women have basically been married. My maiden name is Maria Teresa Peterson. Right. So when I got married, I decided to change it to Kumar because everybody had already assumed I had been thrice divorced. So instead of explaining the complication that I was from a bicultural household, I just basically said Kumar, right? And so like millions of American women, I could potentially be disenfranchised if I can't figure out where my birth certificate is. Yeah. In the case of many Americans, imagine all those people in LA, right? That where they have all their records have been burned to the ground. Yeah. How are you going to make sure that that is not true, that they are American citizens or that they have changed their names quite legally?
By the way, Trump tried to require in return for aid about the fires to make California have some kind of voter ID requirement. Did that work? Did he get that through? No. Okay. Whew. There's one win.
We've had several.
Yeah,
we've had several. I mean, the courts. I mean, I think right now the courts are actually doing their job. Even Trump-appointed judges are saying we all have to abide by the same rules.
Maya, at the same time as the act went through the House of Representatives, Trump signed an executive order in late March, saying much the same thing that the SAVE Act said. Part of why he did that, of course, is as a kind of insurance, I guess, because assuming that the act wasn't going to get through the Senate. But tell people watching us about the implications of that executive order.
So let me just say I so appreciate Maria Teresa because that 69 million number is very real. And we should say that in everything we're talking about, including the executive order, it has the ability to harm whether you're elderly of any race in any zip code. So in addition, whether you're young, I mean, the elderly and young are going to be the most impact, and that's across race, that's across zip codes. The thing about the executive order is it's absolutely, these are two versions of the same coin and the poison pen, which is Donald Trump as a president trying to be a monarch, trying to take a pen to erase the U.S. Constitution and say, I have the power to require what is a bipartisan election commission to require on federal voter registration that you prove your citizenship. Now, this is unconstitutional. It violates the separation of powers. All that means is that's Congress's power, not the president's. That's why you see two strategies. One for the president to do it, one for Congress. What we have to remember about the executive orders, and I think this goes back to an important point Maria Teresa made about information and facts, is it's also propaganda. Because it's actually another way of trying to suggest that there's a problem with the system that must be fixed, when the only problem is what this president is trying to do to the system, which is to make it harder for voters to do what they are allowed to do. So it is the same side of the same coin. I think one of the other things we have to recognize is, because we don't talk about this as much, is Doge, is the relationship between Doge and Elon Musk and the danger that creates for voters. Because the data that Doge has taken, that is identifiable data for us, states administer elections. States decide who's eligible to vote. That's the job of the state in our Constitution. But if the government says through Doge, we want to give you, this is something we've fought for a long time, we want to give you data from the federal government so you can go purge voters off the rolls by claiming they're not citizens. I say claiming because that data is dated. So you could be, say I am someone who's come to this country and has applied for citizenship, and it can take a very long time. So the health department or the tax department might have information about me that says I'm not a citizen. But now I've been naturalized. Now I am. The state says, oh, yeah, you're good. You can vote. And then the government says, nope, we have data for you. And the state says, we're going to purge you, even though now you are a citizen. This is the kind of thing that is a very real danger, but it's also a very real example of a government run amok that says it cares about states' rights, which, by the way, I find offensive to begin with. But it actually doesn't mean it. What it really means is when we see an opportunity to hold on to our own power, we will use it even if it's against a state doing what it has the power under the Constitution to do. So there are a couple of different things happening here that should be seen as connected.
Well, and I think that it's, when you look at it by itself, it seems, again, very innocent. We want to make sure that the integrity of our elections are safe. So we're going to centralize it in the federal government because states may not understand what they're doing. But then when you look at the collective of all the facets of how the administration wants to centralize power, whether we're talking about DOJ, whether we're talking about implementing tariffs, whether we're talking about whether or not we should raise or lower the interest rates, all centralized, there's only one person that becomes the kingmaker, and it's not the voter. It is Donald Trump. And I think when we look at that collectively, voters, again, regardless of political stripes, should really be thinking twice. Do you really want someone that one day decides that you are not actually who you say you are, and they basically scrub you off a list? They want our taxes. They want a democracy, but they want it on their terms. And what I deeply believe is the opportunities that we are seeing so many Americans rise up and going to town halls, even in the most ruby of ruby red counties, saying that is not the mandate we requested. We wanted our mandate to be lowering the cost of eggs.
Let's talk about, we've just been talking about playing defense. Let's talk a little bit about playing offense. What would you both love to see if you could wave a wand? The United States of America or the various states, since this is really up to states to decide these kinds of rules, what kind of laws would you like to see are being pushed for out there? Maybe stand a chance of being enacted somewhere. Give folks a little bit of good news. Maya, first.
Well, I mean, first we should recognize that there are many states in this country that are working very hard to make it easier for voters to vote. Mm-hmm. That's really important to understand because I know as we have all focused on rightly the onslaught of states making it harder, making it more challenging, North Carolina being a particularly horrible example of trying to steal elections.
But we won that case. Voto Latino literally won that case.
Right. So, but I'm just saying the effort that some states are putting in to try to keep people from having a voice about who leads them. That's all we're really talking about here. But I say that because whether you're in New York that did pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or many other states, but we need things like early voting. We need things like getting dark money out of politics. We need things like making sure that we have more mail-in ballot options and that we're not utilizing government to find ways to intimidate people from voting or allowing people to intimidate others from voting. I mean, remember that one of the problems that we have seen and it is the fact that Donald Trump and many others in the MAGA movement got social media companies to back off of their content moderation policies that ensured some, not even enough, but some protection of people from intimidation to go vote and from lies about whether they could or where they could and how they could. Those are gone now. The tech companies have fallen to their knees and kissed the ring in a way that's very dangerous. But there are a lot of states that are doing more and more to try to make sure people have access to the correct information and know where and how to vote.
Maria Teresa, I know you've also given a lot of thought to not only what the various states are doing, but what's happening in other countries, in other democracies.
So back in 2020, E.J. Dionne, when he was at Brookings, and Miles Rappaport, when he was at the
Still
Carr
there,
Center,
by the way.
still there. At the Carr Center at Harvard, he brought in a group of 15 of us to discuss how do we actually protect our democracy and how do we modernize it for the 21st century. And we went on an 18-month journey looking at different systems. We looked at Australia, New Zealand, we looked at the Netherlands, and the Nordic countries, and it was super interesting. One of the things that seemed to connect all of these modern democracies was by implementing universal voting. And they found two things. One is with universal voting, the extremes tamped down because all of a sudden politicians needed to talk to the person that says politics is not for me. And they needed to appeal to that individual.
You should make sure people know what universal voting is.
Yeah, so universal basically is that everybody has to cast a ballot. And we've thought about it because in some cases, people were saying, well, if you do universal voting, then is there a fine related to it? There's, and we've thought about it. And there's now an organization where, full disclosure, I'm an advisor to. It's called 100% Democracy. And Miles and EJ have been going around the country, and there has been a state legislator right now that has passed it on the House side, Assembly side, in Chicago. Connecticut is working towards it as well. But this idea that if you talk to Americans, they're tired of the yelling in politics. They're tired of the pendulum elections. There's an unneeded anxiety to move our country forward. And when you start talking to them about how do we modernize it, the tools that Maya mentioned, along with this idea that if we are truly citizens of a democracy, our job as citizens is to nurture that democracy. And that democracy's nurture and that love and that care is literally through our vote. And so that is one of the things that we should consider. We may not have all the answers in this country. Who is doing it well, and how can we adapt those? And if folks who are in elected office truly believe in policy change and modernization, this is a place to start.
We have about 5 minutes. I want to wrap up by going back to bad news, which in certain ways, we'd rather talk about anyway.
No, we want modernization.
So let me put this hypothetical to both of you. I'm sure you've both lain awake in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about this as I have. If somehow he were to try to cancel the 2028 election, how might he get away with it? What might he try to do, Maya?
Well, he's already doing.
Michael, you just want to take us to a really dark place.
Look,
look,
why
would we want to give anybody suggestions on how he would do it?
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far.
Yeah, okay, fair point there.
But it is a really, actually, excellent point. And I'm just going to say that everything we're seeing is part of the march to that path. And it's actually why part of what Maria Teresa is saying and doing, by the way, and what Voto Latino and so many others are doing, is so important, from litigating to supporting public education, to also making sure people go out and protest. I mean, I just want to say this because it's already starting, that inflection point, where we are not in as good a place as I think we would like with the Supreme Court. That's my very polite way of saying it.
Yeah, okay.
This is not a court this is a court that has been undermining voting for well over a decade now. And it's one of the reasons we have seen the gap in voter participation between Black, Latino, and white, meaning we have seen a real impact of these extreme laws in many of these states, making it harder for people to vote. But the reason I'm saying this and refusing to completely answer your question for all the reasons that Maria said is every single one of these things matters in terms of the building to trying to steal an election, from the propaganda to ensuring that the propaganda can flow on social media platforms, to ensuring that people are intimidated or think that their problem is that someone who speaks a different language is voting or who has a different skin color is voting. And it is not working. It is important that we really focus on the fact that when we go to parts of the country that may be more susceptible to these arguments, that we actually have a very different conversation about what they're experiencing, what they need, and why they are not getting it. Because what we're seeing right now, this week, when we're about to have a Congress try to, and next week, tell people they can't see a doctor when they're sick, that their schools, their class sizes are going to grow, that they don't get the help and support they want for their kids who have disabilities, that people who are hungry are no longer going to get a little bit of help with food stamps. And by the way, that's going to hurt the farmers who are also worried about the soybeans because they're losing the market to China because of tariffs. There is a long story here about what we share as human need and what we need as humans to ensure that our government is paying attention to. And that's what's going to stop the steal, because there is a steal, and we're going to stop it.
Maria, last word.
So we just came out with a massive poll that looked at Latino voters and folks that had basically voted in 2020 and decided to sit it out, regardless of who they voted for. And what concerns me come in 2028 is the fastest growing segment of voters in this country are those who decide not to show up. Almost a third of Americans last time decided not to show up. And when you ask why they didn't, they can't tell the difference between the two parties. And part of it is there's massive disinformation coming out of Russia and China, encouraging Americans, telling them that the system does not work. And so it's incumbent among organizations that Maya leads, Voto Latino, and the ecosystem, such as the New Republic, of reminding folks of what happens when we do vote, when we do protest, when we do show up, that the system does change. My concern is that if he decides in some sort of way to participate, it's because he has dampened the spirit of the American people by sitting it out. And I would say that apathy, and it's not even apathy, that's that frustration. That is my biggest concern between now and then, because the whole point of his presidency right now is to flood the zone, make it seem that things are too hard and that they might as well go along. And I always remind people, there's about 50 folks from Doge.
Right.
50. And they are basically throwing all the spaghetti at the wall, trying to see how much we will take. And now is the moment for protest because they haven't figured out the system. But there are federal workers who understand the system. There are Americans who really care about the system. And there are millions of people who are dependent on the system. Now is the time to make sure that we are very vocal and that we basically call their bluff.
Amen to that, folks. Maria Teresa Kumar, Maya Wiley, two warriors on the front lines. I'm thrilled to share this stage with you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work.
By early in the morning, it was evident to me that something special was happening on April 5. By 9:30, Washington, D.C. was filled with protesters, signs, and honking horns showing their solidarity.
The idea that the people, not just leaders of the Democratic Party and therefore the resistance, need to also have agency to push back and organize and use our voices.
You ready? The organizers of April 5 promised over 1,000 different events around the country, and they got them from New York to Washington, D.C., to L.A., to small towns, to rural America. For months, opposition to Donald Trump's policies and to him personally, as well as Elon Musk, is palpable. People simply needed an occasion to let it pour forth. Of course, the Contrarian's very own Norm Eisen had a few words for the crowd.
We are the litigators! the largest crowd that I've ever talked to.
We picked up on some of the buzz, some of the excitement that we were hearing. You never stop. You never stop organizing. You never stop protesting. You never stop turning out. And that's the task ahead. If they think we're going away, they've got another thing coming. Thank you for joining us, Sherrilyn.
Thank you for having me.
Did we exaggerate the threat that Donald Trump posed to democracy?
No, we did not. We did not, Jen. And I think that is widely understood at this moment. The question is, why did so many choose to underestimate what we were facing and what we were confronting? And I think that's the question we really have to grapple with. So many of us were absolutely clear. Many of us were absolutely clear in 2015. And I would say for myself, one of the things that was tremendously frustrating at that time, I was leading a civil rights legal organization, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And that year and years into Trump's first term, I would be asked, why do you think that Trump, is racist? Is he really? Or is he just saying certain kinds of things to get a reaction? And I found this so annoying. It finally got to the point where I just refused to answer the question anymore. They would say, lay out for me the case, And I thought, this is crazy. This is an intelligent, often reporter at a mainstream publication. These weren't always white reporters. Sometimes they were Black reporters, I think, who felt they had to have the subject say this and justify it. And I just got tired of it. I felt there was a willful effort not to see who Trump was and what he represented. And you'll remember the countless stories of, going to diners in Ohio and Pennsylvania and trying to understand the voters who supported Trump and what did they really want, refusing to deal with the elephant in the room and what was staring them straight in the face. So I think that was one part of it. The other part of it was, and I've written about this, people did not want to be moved out of their area of expertise. They desperately wanted everything to be normal. I've been following political campaigns since I was a kid because my dad was a political junkie. And so I know the way it goes. I haven't, the only political convention I've ever missed was the Republican convention this year. Because I said, I'm not watching this. It's not a convention. And the only inauguration I've ever missed was the inauguration of Donald Trump this year. I've been watching these, campaigns, conventions, inaugurations since 1972, since I was a very little girl. And I know what the choreography is. And I wish it could be the way I expect it to be also. But it's not. It's not. And I think that some reporters and other pundits and other prominent leaders have so desperately wanted to stay in their comfort zone, the comfort zone from which they feel comfortable reporting about the Supreme Court, reporting about politics, the both sides folks, right? Like they just want it to so desperately to be normal because that's the place of their expertise. And I think that needs to be confronted. When I say I want people to admit that they were wrong about tamping down the threat, it's not because I want to say, I was right and you were wrong, nana. That's not the point. It's I want to understand how and why, and you should want to understand you were so wrong, because these are sophisticated, intelligent people who have been, in there at the top of their field for a very long time. So when you have this kind of catastrophic failure of analysis, we need to understand why.
Absolutely. Let's go through the various aspects of society, and I'd like to hear how you assess their response to the Trump phenomenon. Let's start with the politicians. What kind of grade would you give? What kind of assessment? Have they gotten better with time?
Well, certainly not the Republicans. The Republicans have actually gotten worse, right? The Republicans have actually gotten worse. In 2015, when Trump was running for election, we had Republicans from Lindsey Graham to Marco Rubio to Ted Cruz who saw Trump for what he was and who were very vocal and very clear about the danger that he represented. Obviously, that changed. They changed. They decided instead to put expedience and their own, the kinds of careers they wanted to have ahead of the truth. And as Trump grew more powerful, and that's what you realize many of these folks didn't understand, he became less compromising. He had less to lose. He could really turn the screws. And now these folks became afraid for their livelihoods. I'd never understood how desperately members of Congress want to hold on to their jobs until the last 7 or 8 years. I just didn't know, because I always thought, well, they can make much more money lobbying. They can do all these other things. They can be TV pundits. It's not like, you're going to be shaking a tin can on the street, if you're no longer a United States senator. But I realize how desperately they want this job. They want the office. They want a staff. They want people who look up to them. They want the title. They want to get their hair cut in the Senate barbershop for life. I think Jeff Sessions still shows up there. And they want all of the emoluments of office and the feeling of it. And I had not accounted for that. So politicians have not covered themselves in glory. It's certainly not the Republicans. The Republicans are the reason why we have Donald Trump. Honestly, they had the chance, particularly after, certainly with the first impeachment, but especially after January 6th, the Senate could have convicted him after that impeachment in the House, and he would have been done with public life. But they proved themselves to be unable to do that. And once Kevin McCarthy made his trip down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring, it was pretty much a done deal. And so Republicans have done an abysmal job. And in my view, they are the ones responsible for giving away American democracy. Democrats are learning far too slowly that this is real, and that you cannot use the rhetoric that you used to use, about both sides and bipartisanship. And I lived through this. I had a number of meetings with Joe Manchin. There were lots of attempts to meet with Kristen Sinema, who had no interest in meeting with civil rights leaders. And the mantra of bipartisanship it's just silly. It just doesn't fit with this time. But Democrats were not able to let it go. And they believed they have been, looking for the great white whale for decades, which is the mythical white Reagan voter, white Republican voter who used to be a Democrat. And the electorate has changed so powerfully. And the Democrats are still talking about an electorate that existed a long time ago. Even Clinton Democrats, right? You hear James Carville talking in ways that suggest that he thinks the electorate can be returned to what it was, when in fact it cannot. It cannot even be returned to the Obama electorate. We have a new electorate, and we have to deal with that. So politicians are not doing great. Democrats are coming around and learning, but they have to learn more quickly and have to pivot, I think, more completely and more effectively than they've done thus far.
The public. We've seen a spate of public demonstrations. How do you think the public is reacting? And have they, frankly, been ahead of the politicians?
For sure. As is appropriate. I actually think the public should be ahead of the politicians, right? And so I think that is absolutely true. I would say, given the fact that, a year ago, Donald Trump was able to garner, nearly 80 million votes, I can't say I have a tremendous confidence in the public either, right? There is a public that is willful in its desire to have Donald Trump on the scene. And I think that's just real. What we have seen, the reason we are in this moment, particularly with Donald Trump 2.0, is that American voters have shown themselves to be ill-prepared and immature and ill-equipped to actually vote in a way that is responsible and appropriate for voters in the most powerful country in the world that used to be considered the leader of the free world. That's an actual responsibility. It's not just you get to vote whatever your feelings are, and that, you don't get to vote in a way that just feeds your desire to be entertained. When I hear people saying, including, I heard a famous country artist saying this the other day, that, I really like Donald Trump because he talks like me. And what I thought was, you don't talk so good, And I'm not sure why you would want the leader of your country, let alone the leader of the most powerful country in the world, to talk like you. You want the president to be better than you. You want the president to be more disciplined. You want the president to be more compassionate. You want the president to be stronger. You want you want a president who's better than you, not a president who's just like you. And we started this with George W. Bush. I'd like to have a beer with him. I just don't think that's necessary, and I don't think that's that's part of the resume. And so I think what we have seen is that the American electorate, frankly, is immature and unprepared for this country to be a leader in the world. And that's now done. We are not a leader in the world, not of anything good at this moment. And we will not be able to recapture our stance very easily. So, if at all. So I think that's one way to think about the public. I do think it's lovely to see more in the public understanding that you have to come out of your house. You have to rally. You have to make phone calls. You have to be an active citizen. It's not enough for you to just show up and vote and then go back in your hole for the next 4 years. So I think that has dawned on many Americans. Like, speaking from my own community, I have been very proud of my community because we have been on point since 2015. And some of the great work that has come out of came out of Trump the first time around, out of his first presidency, came from lawyers working in the space of civil rights, came from protests that were sparked by civil rights activists who have really demonstrated a keen sense of what justice is supposed to mean in this country and have been unafraid to demand it. And but I think that this last election was really a blow. We see it as a powerful rebuke of our presence as full citizens in this country, and I think that will inure to the detriment of the entire country. I don't think this is a moment in which this country should be in any way proud of itself, to be honest with you. And so I think I love, however, to see that, a number of leaders, we're doing lots of strategy work behind the scenes, lots of writing, lots of connection, lots of rethinking about strategy and comms. And so I wouldn't say that, anyone is checked out. But I do think that after something like that election last November, we all do have to pause. The problem, as you and I both know, is we don't have much time, because Trump is moving fast. And so I've been really happy to see the protests happening now. We've had 2 major days of protests. I actually like the fact that they're kind of decentralized. I think, again, the media is trained to see the big mass protest in DC because, it begins with the March on Washington, and then we should also always have this big mass protest in DC. But I like these decentralized protests happening around the country. It brings more people into it. It's a harder target for those who are opponents, and gives everyone something to do. And we need to be united as a nation in that way. If you're in California, the chance that you're going to get to the big DC protest is slim, or if you're in Portland, or if you're in Birmingham. And so I think it's exciting that people have found that the place to protest is in your own state or in your own community, and let your voice be heard there.
Civil society. We have seen this pattern of Trump trying to pick off one law firm, one university. But recently we have seen 180 universities come together. We've seen a solidarity statement from civil society groups. How do you assess civil society in this?
I'm stunned, to be honest with you, Jen, at the capitulation that initially happened. I'm still, turning it over in my head. And I'm really happy to see Harvard and Princeton and so many other universities now beginning to stand up and stand strong. I'm happy now to see, some law firms. I'm stunned by the capitulation of major law firms to Trump to be willing to sign these bizarre agreements. I can't believe it. Sometimes it's just I can't believe that at a venerable program like the Skadden Fellows, that are these wonderful young lawyers who've been dispatched to organizations for the last 35 years, and I've met so many of them and supervised so many of them and interviewed so many of them over the years, and they're some of the best leaders in our country, and that they would make an agreement to place fellows in a particular place. I mean, to basically give away the brand. I just don't understand it, and I think that also requires some study. Whatever the reason, I'm really happy to see the turn. And you know what I think it tells us, Jen, is we have to begin to talk about civil society leadership. And we need university leaders who understand the role of the university in a democracy. Hiring someone as a president of a university because they ran a super successful hedge fund is probably not a great idea, right? Because when crisis happens, when the stuff hits the fan, you need someone who can articulate and who feels it in their bones what the purpose of this particular institution of civil society is all about. And so, that I've been writing and talking about the legal profession since the first Trump administration and how important the legal profession is to upholding the rule of law, and why we have to assess ourselves and take seriously our oaths and hold the line on the rule of law. So, I just think seeing these firms capitulate it was the first time I was frightened. It was the first time I was frightened in the 10 years that Trump has been on the scene, because I just thought, how can it be? How can law firms, not some little itty bitty law firm that has, few clients, but the best, what I know to be the best of the best, agree to turn over their independence in large measure to this administration, or any administration. I would be horrified if they were willing to sign such an agreement with President Obama or President Clinton or President Biden. I would be horrified. So, it's early days on the resistance that has sprung up among universities and law firms, which I'm really happy to see with Perkins Coie and others. But we really have to spend some time analyzing what that was about and what it means, and ensuring that that kind of thing never happens again.
And what I would add, I know you have recognized this, is that labor unions have been the most stalwart, the most courageous in fighting at every turn. And if Americans didn't understand the role of labor unions in democracy, hopefully they do now.
For sure.
So that is a blessing. As we reach the end of our time, I'd like you to take us out of this day. Where do we go forward? And what do you say to people who want to give up, who say, oh, I'm tired, or it's useless, I'm going to go back to my stamp collection or do whatever else in society? What would you say?
How nice for them. How nice for them. I come from a tradition of people who understand the long game and who understand the power of democratic imagination and determination. The men and women who, accomplished the breaking of Jim Crow in this country, of legalized segregation in this country, had only ever known legalized segregation, right? Their grandparents, for many of them, had been enslaved. The Thurgood Marshalls and the Robert Carters and the Constance Baker Motleys had only ever, and the Jack Greenbergs, had only ever known a world in which there was Jim Crow segregation. And yet they had a vision for a different world. It wasn't a blueprint. They weren't trying to make America great again, right? There was nothing to go back to. But they had this democratic imagination of how we would fulfill the words of our Constitution, and they set about a strategy. Now, from the time that Thurgood Marshall won his first successful civil rights case in 1935, striking down the exclusion of Black students at the University of Maryland Law School in Baltimore, to Brown versus Board of Education, in which the Supreme Court struck down legalized state-sanctioned segregation in education, was less than 20 years. So 1935 to 1954 is 19 years. And that's remarkable, right? Because they were not even full citizens themselves. You know, when Thurgood Marshall was litigating those cases, when he was litigating the Oklahoma segregation case, he couldn't even eat in the cafeteria of the courthouse in Oklahoma. So I come from a tradition of people who just understand the long game. Now, I'm not willing to wait 19 years, and neither are you, right? You know, some of us have to look into the face of our kids and our grandkids. And it is a sacred pact that you will hand your children a world that is at least as good, if not better, than the one that was given to you. And none of us can say that. We have actually broken that pact at this moment. So to those people who think that they can check out, I would say, you don't have the right to check out. And if you will notice, we are making progress. It's strategic. I said from the beginning that we could not fight the forces arrayed against us if they were all lockstep. We couldn't fight Trump and Elon and the Republicans and the business community, and we couldn't do it. And so what I said was we had to begin to work on creating space between them, starting with Elon. And we did that, right? If you know, the Tesla protests across the country actually did weaken Elon. Of course, he was mostly weakened by his own, you know, capriciousness and his lack of self-control. But it is true that that was done by grassroots protests that sprung up around the country. I know he'd like to think people are being paid to protest, but no, absolute outrage brought people out and continues to bring people out across the country. And so now he is prepared to slink back to Tesla. Now, nothing will undo at this moment all of the damage that he's done. I don't mean to suggest that, but we've already created that separation, right? Next up is the separation between the Republicans in Congress and Trump. And we're beginning to see that happen. We saw that beginning to happen with the tariffs, where you had Republican members of Congress, many of them behind the scenes, scared to death because their own constituents are saying, what the hell are you doing to us? What are you doing to our small businesses? What are you doing to our farmers? What are you doing to our universities and who rely on federal dollars for research and so forth, right? So I would say to people, don't get weary in well-doing. Stay the course. We've got to break the links between these folks who are standing together. And then we have the most powerful election we're going to have in a long time, in a year. I'm not focused on 2028. I'm focused on 2026. The most important thing right now is getting that gavel out of the hand of Mike Johnson. And that means showing up next year and ensuring that the Democrats can take over the House. Because all of this that's happening in the federal government, all that Elon Musk has been able to do, all of the bloodletting, all of the money that has been used to extort people, could not happen if Congress were standing fully in its job. All of that money has been appropriated by Congress, and rightfully the president has no right to reallocate or try to misappropriate money that Congress has already allocated pursuant to its constitutional authority. The problem we have is that we have a Congress that has decided to lay down and to turn over their power to the executive. That's the constitutional crisis. The constitutional crisis is that one branch of our government has decided not to do their job and instead to turn their power over to another branch of government, which is not how our constitutional architecture was created. So I would say to people, stay the course, continue to apply pressure to break apart this wall of opposition, and remember your duty, your obligation to try and hand over the world in better condition than it was given to you.
I could not say it any better. Thank you so much for joining us and finishing our day at the 100 Days Conference.
Thank you, Jen.
And that was the 100 Days Conference. Thank you all for joining us. We are overwhelmed by the response, and it just goes to show in independent media, you get the smartest, the best analysis, the most in-depth conversation, and we bring all of you into it because what this is about, as many of our speakers said, is community, is solidarity, and I think going forward, we will all be inspired by the first 100 days, but it's just the first 100 days. As I wrote today, and I will write in the future, this is the end of the beginning. It's not the end, and it's certainly not the beginning of the end. But I think we will prevail. There's a lot to be optimistic about. I want to thank our fabulous partners at the New Republic and for hosting us and for all of their advice and collegiality and assistance. We could not have done this without them. And again, thank you to all of you.
The story that I heard today was the story of expectations that Donald Trump and his dictatorial momentum felt like we were sleepwalking as we headed towards January 20th. But that those expectations have been frustrated and blocked. It's only the end of the beginning, but the litigation, our very first panel we started, that conflagration threw sparks out. And we heard today a narrative of how those sparks helped. I think of them as the 4 Ps. The first one is court proceedings. Then the next one is the sparks flew over and they ignited public protests, like that wonderful hands-off day. And then they jumped from there, those sparks of loyal, patriotic, vigorous, lawful, but powerful opposition. They jumped over to polling places. The landslide, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, became a referendum on Trump and Musk and their autocracy. And the voters of Wisconsin, always on the bubble, they overturned that. And then I was telling Jen and Michael as we were waiting, the 4th P, political leaders. I was so thrilled. I went to court last week to fight Donald Trump's executive order, his decree to try to break American elections. And the political leadership, the Chuck Schumers and Hakeem Jeffries, had a full table of lawyers there joining the fight. And there's a 5th P, and Jen talked about it. I'm going to throw it to Michael. He and the New Republic exemplify it. I'll end where I began, one of the most venerable, honored. I've read the New Republic all my life. I can't believe I'm sharing a stage. What is that 5th P? The press, independent media. We at the Contrarian, so proud to celebrate a little over 100 days of our activity and to do it together with the New Republic. And now, for the last word, our friend, the editor of New Republic, our co-sponsor, Michael Tomasky.
Thank you so much. You know, I think if we'd done this at 70 days or 80 days, the tone of this would have been pretty different. In the last month or so, something has changed. I heard today a lot of concern, a lot of very deep concern about the state of our republic and what's happening. But more than that, I heard resolve. I heard people who are resolved to change things, who are resolved to fight, who are not afraid, and who are ready to go into battle and defend the values that we care about. And that's what I take away from this. I take away also from it the fact that so many thousands of you tuned in to watch this. Enough to fill a basketball arena, maybe even a baseball stadium on the smaller side. But that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And that tells me, too, that there is resolve, not only in this room where we had this event, but out there across this country. My deep thanks to Jen and Norm and everybody at the Contrarian who helped make this such a success. I want to also mention Kim Blanchard of the New Republic, who worked very hard on putting this event together. I want to thank Wynn McCormick, the owner of the New Republic, for supporting this, being such a good steward of what we're trying to do. Please, read the New Republic, read the Contrarian, get involved, and don't give up.